You are about to attend a countryside wedding in 14th century Europe, where everything is far from what you have seen in movies. There are no flowing white gowns, no confetti, and no rose petals scattered on the path. Instead, there is a muddy, dirt road, the smell of kitchen smoke mixed with dry grass, and roosters crowing louder than the drums. Villagers bring old wooden tables and chairs. The wedding dress is made from wool, and the wine cup passes through a dozen hands. This is not a wedding to show off wealth, but for the whole village to celebrate in their own way. Have you ever wondered what a wedding more than 700 years ago looked like? And if you were invited, would you attend? If your answer is yes, click like and subscribe so I can take you straight to the banquet. Now, tell me, what time is it where you are listening right now? Are you lying in bed, sitting in a cafe, or just turning off the lights to sleep? Now imagine you are standing at the village gate with the sound of horns and cheers in the distance. Children run past your feet holding bread, while dogs bark along with the drumbeats. Villagers smile, carrying baskets of vegetables, jars of honey, or a plump chicken as wedding gifts. No one wears a suit, but everyone is dressed in the best clothes they own. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread drifts from the yard in front of the church. You are pulled into a row of seats, sitting on a slightly wobbly wooden chair, but sturdy enough not to fall. A warm mug of honey wine is placed in your hand, a simple but unforgettable aroma. You take a sip, feeling as if you have officially entered the celebration. All eyes begin turning toward the church door, where the bride and groom are about to appear. And this is the moment the story of a 14th century village wedding begins. Dawn in the village comes with uneven rooster crows and barking dogs from the backyards. The morning chill carries the smell of mud, kitchen smoke, and a hint of bread baking. Men carry wooden tables into the yard, hearing worrying creaks the moment they set them down. Others use hammers to fix banquet chairs, but each strike seems to loosen another old nail. Children run round, shouting and chasing each other through the kitchen where fires are being lit. A chicken escapes from its cage, flapping its wings as women shout and chase after it. In the corner of the yard, an old man carefully wipes wooden mugs with a worn cloth. Bouquets of wildflowers are quickly gathered, tied with twine, and placed on the church steps. Someone tries to hang a flag on the roof, but the morning wind keeps whipping the cloth into their face. The sound of hammering, chopping wood, and people calling each other blends into a chaotic symphony. In the kitchen, a big pot of pottage boils vigorously, its aroma mixing with smoke in the air. A young woman cuts vegetables while arguing with her sister about how much meat is enough. Children watch, sneaking bites when they can, then running off when scolded. Villagers bring all sorts of chairs, tables, and even wooden barrels to sit on when seats run short. A group of young men practice drumming for the procession, but each keeps a different rhythm. At the far end of the village, the groom fumbles with his belt because the old strap is worn. The bride stays inside, hearing the noise outside, feeling both excited and nervous. A child carries the tablecloth but drops it into a muddy puddle before reaching the table. Someone sets up the outdoor banquet table while another covers it with cloth. To keep birds away, the sun begins to rise, shining on the thatched roofs, making the atmosphere brighter and livelier. The scent of honey wine being tested drifts lightly in the wind, mixing with the smell of fresh bread. An old woman mutters while checking the plates, all ceramic and chipped a little. Meanwhile, the young men keep shouting, moving chairs, and running around to check positions. Someone brings more firewood, drops it by the kitchen, and rushes out to check the flag hanging. A crashing sound comes from the corner. One plate doesn't survive the morning preparations. The pale blue sky holds a few birds flying overhead, ignoring the bustle below. Guests from afar are surprised to see everyone having something to do. It feels as if the whole village is helping, though their methods are not very coordinated. There is no leader, but everyone believes the wedding will happen as planned. Laughter erupts when a young man trips over a rope and almost falls into the soup pot. The smell of smoke from the kitchen spreads through the village, clinging to hair, clothes, and even the wildflower bouquets. A mother soothes her crying child by giving it a piece of hard bread to hold. A group of people arrange honey and dried fruit pastries on a long table. Voices call out from the edge of the village, signaling that the procession is about to start. Everyone quickly finishes their tasks, wiping their hands on aprons or shirts. The atmosphere is lively but tinged with tension. As if everyone fears missing the important moment, each chair is placed neatly. Though many are still slightly tilted, morning light shines into the yard, turning everything into a vivid picture. You stand in the middle of it all, watching and waiting for the drum to signal the start of the ceremony. Then, the drummer's call rings out, telling everyone to quickly line up in position. All eyes begin, searching for the bride and groom. The groom appears first, wearing a wool tunic that has been washed thoroughly, but still carries a hint of kitchen smoke. His leather belt wraps around twice, the knot tied tightly to hide the worn spot. The boots borrowed from his cousin are both too big and too loose, making each step slightly awkward. The bride follows, her wedding dress made of thick wool. Its color faded, but carefully patched. On her head is a crown of freshly picked wildflowers. A few petals trembling as she moves, a thin shawl drapes over her shoulders, keeping her warm and hiding the patched sleeve. In her hand is a small bouquet tied with rough twine, its gentle scent blending with the smoky air outside. Guests are dressed in all sorts of outfits, from simple tunics to old dresses that have been ray-dyed. Some go barefoot, others wear wooden shoes, the clattering sound echoing across the churchyard. Children wear tunics that hang below their knees, their hands sticky with honey from stolen sweets. An old woman in a thick headscarf leans on her cane, smiling toothlessly at the couple. Near the front row, a man in a sheepskin coat cradles a jar of wine to share with the guests. The groom tries to keep a solemn face, but the loose boots almost make him stumble on a stone step. The bride bows her head slightly when someone offers blessings, her flower crown tilting to one side. Morning light streams through the church door, highlighting the fabric's color and the lines of stitching. The scent of damp wool, wildflowers, and a hint of honey wine fills the air. Guests murmur softly about the dress. Some praise the handiwork, others stay silent. The groom glances around, as if making sure no one spills the jar of wine meant for the ritual. The bride walks slowly, her dress brushing together with a soft rustling sound. A child runs past, nearly bumping into her, but is pulled back by its mother just in time. A guest coughs lightly, then takes the chance to wipe his hands on his shirt before shaking the groom's hand. Many garments are decorated with scraps of colored fabric, with no particular pattern. Wool hats of every color stand out in the crowd, some adorned with small feathers. A male guest shows off a newly bought belt while the man beside him nods, pretending to care. The bride gently adjusts her flower crown, taking a deep breath as if to gather courage. The groom tightens his belt and glances quickly toward the banquet table already prepared. On their faces is a mix of nervousness and barely hidden excitement. The drums pause, giving way to the sound of horns welcoming them. Guests fall silent for a moment, then whispers fill the rows again. A sparrow lands on the church roof, watching like a tiny spectator. The scent of wildflower bouquets drifts on the wind, brushing past the last row of seats. A light breeze stirs the bride's skirt, revealing a pair of small leather shoes worn at the heels. The groom stands firmer, forcing a confident smile toward the guests. A neighbor woman gasps softly upon seeing the bride's shawl identical to one she once wove. The couple's eyes meet briefly, but long enough to make those around them smile. The wind, the horns, and the footsteps blend into the opening rhythm of the ceremony. The scene is both simple and special, as if the whole village shares a secret. And as everyone takes their seats, the priest begins walking out from inside the church. The ritual is about to take place, and all are waiting for the most important moment of the day. Before the priest can begin the opening words, more guests from neighboring villages start to arrive. They have walked for hours, shoes covered in mud, hands carrying all sorts of wedding gifts. One person brings a basket of eggs, looking as if they were taken from the nest just this morning. Another carries a large bundle of onions, their strong scent spreading through the rows of seats. Some bring jars of honey, checking the lids as they walk to avoid spilling on their clothes. A young Man carefully carries a rooster, both a wedding gift and tonight's dinner. An old woman on a cane carries a basket of bread hard as bricks. Some come with nothing but blessings and a firm handshake. Children cling to their parents, curiously looking around, slipping hands into food baskets when no one is watching. A few guests look tired, sitting down in the rows and breathing heavily. Others take the chance to stand and chat about the weather and the crops. The smells of the gifts mingle: fresh eggs, onions, live chicken, honey cakes. There are no envelopes or wrapped boxes, only things that can be eaten or raised. The groom nods thanks to each person, trying to remember who brought what so he can share later. The bride smiles, taking an extra bouquet of wildflowers from a little girl. A male guest accidentally drops a pumpkin onto the ground, splitting it open with seeds scattering everywhere. The person beside him bends down, quickly slipping them into his pocket like a prize. An elderly guest opens a small bottle of wine, pouring it to share with the surrounding rows. Laughter erupts when a child tries to carry a rooster far too big for him. One guest tells of walking across 3 hills just to make it in time for the ceremony. They say this is the biggest event of the year, and everyone wants to be here. A group of young men tease the groom, asking if he can drink all the wine given to him. The groom only smiles awkwardly, knowing some bottles will have to be opened tonight. New arrivals keep looking for seats. The wooden chairs are full and wooden barrels are added. A mother seats her small child on her lap to give her place to someone else. The sounds of footsteps, chatter, and chicken calls fill the yard. The priest clears his throat, signaling for more attention. Yet some still quietly pass food to each other while waiting. A boy holds up a carrot, showing it off as a special gift for the bride. An old man proudly shows a bottle of homemade apple cider vinegar, saying for a long life together. The gifts may be simple, but each carries a blessing in its own way. There are no ornate patterns or valuable objects, only things meant for daily life. And in those days, that was the truly precious wedding gift. The bride and groom exchange a small glance, as if agreeing that this noise is part of the celebration. A man brings in a large bundle of firewood, placing it by the kitchen in preparation for the feast. Guests begin to settle into their seats, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The chatter fades, leaving only the sound of wind and flags fluttering. Someone adjusts the bride's flower crown, while the groom straightens his tunic. The entire village yard seems to hold its breath, waiting for the first prayer to be spoken. And then, the priest opens the book, beginning to speak blessings for the newlyweds. The church doors open, dim light falling on the cold stone walls. The priest stands at the entrance, holding a thick prayer book, his voice deep and slow. Guests file in, the sound of wooden shoes and leather boots tapping softly on the stone floor. The air inside is damp and musty, with a faint smell of beeswax and incense smoke. The bride and groom walk to the front row, eyes fixed on the oak altar. On the altar stands a large candle, its flame trembling in the breeze from the narrow window. The priest begins reciting blessings, his voice echoing in the silent space. He draws out each sentence, causing a few guests to nod sleepily. A child whispers to his mother, asking when they can eat, and she places a hand on his shoulder to hush him. The damp wool scent from the wedding dress mixes with the wildflower fragrance in the bride's hair. The groom holds tightly to a small iron ring in his hand, waiting for the moment to exchange. Rings. The ring is black and heavy, not sparkling, but enough to seal the vow when the ring is given. The priest makes the sign of the cross, and the guests nod slightly. Some make the sign as well, while others simply watch, lips pressed together. A cough echoes from the back row, loud in the quiet room. The priest continues reading, mentioning harvests, health, and children. A cold breeze slips through the door crack, making the bride shiver. A few people clutch their coats tighter, their breath forming thin clouds. The groom's eyes follow every word, trying to maintain a solemn expression. An old woman mutters her own private prayer, not following the priest's words. The priest raises his hand, signaling everyone to say Amen. The response comes in unison, with a few voices slightly out of sync. Light from the window falls on the bride's face, highlighting the slightly crooked flower crown. The final prayer is read, along with a reminder to keep their faith strong. A soft sigh of relief comes from the back row. The bride and groom turn to face the guests, their eyes bright but slightly tense. The priest declares them officially husband and wife. Applause breaks out, at first sparse, then growing more vigorous. A few whistles ring out from the young men outside the door. The bride bows her head with a smile, the groom squeezing his new wife's hand. People begin leaving the church, the sound of shoes and chatter echoing outside. The air feels warmer and brighter, and the smell of food from the banquet draws guests to the yard. A group of children run ahead, leading the way to the long tables already set. Flags flutter on the rooftops, welcoming the procession. Out of the church, someone hands the groom a small cup of wine for a lucky start. The bride is given another small bouquet by a shy little girl. The horns sound again, marking the end of the ceremony and the start of the celebration. An old woman whispers to her neighbor that the feast will be much louder. Guests gather in the village square, where the smell of roasting meat fills the air. The wedding now moves to the part everyone has been waiting for, the feast. The bridal procession begins moving out of the churchyard, drums beating steadily with each step. The groom leads, holding the bride's hand firmly as they walk along the muddy dirt road after yesterday's rain. The sounds of wooden shoes, leather boots, and bare feet mix together, creating an uneven rhythm. The drummers try to keep time, but each still has their own pace. Off-key horns blare between barking dogs and cheering children. A startled chicken runs across, forcing a row of guests to step aside. Along both sides of the road, villagers crowd together to get a clear look at the couple. An old woman throws wildflowers onto the ground, following the custom for good fortune. A few children pick up the flowers to take home, unaware of the ritual's meaning. The smell of kitchen smoke from the houses mixes with the damp earth rising underfoot. A group of young men at the back of the procession sing and clap each other on the shoulder. Someone carries a jug of wine, pouring for anyone who holds out a hand. Laughter grows louder, drowning out the horn trying to hold a simple tune. A guest accidentally steps on the bride's hem, quickly apologizing and stepping back. The bride keeps her balance, her dress slightly muddied, but she keeps walking. The groom tilts his head slightly in greeting to those standing along the road. A boy holds up a bundle of onions as an unusual, congratulatory gift. The drums grow louder as the procession nears the large square in the middle of the village above. Colorful flags wave, signaling the feast is about to begin. Those in front start forming two lines to create an entrance for the couple. The smell of roasting meat from the banquet kitchen has drifted here, making a few people swallow hard. Children push to the front, trying to see the banquet table under the canopy. Cheers erupt as the bride and groom step into the middle of the courtyard. Someone fills the groom's cup with wine, while another hands the bride a piece of honey cake. The two exchange a shy glance under the crowd's encouragement. The instruments keep playing, faster this time, as if urging everyone to find a seat. A few guests leave the line to secure a good spot near the banquet table. The atmosphere gradually shifts from solemn to loud and cheerful. Drums and horns lead the procession into the area prepared for the wedding feast. And then, the final steps of the procession stop in front of the long table laden with food. The banquet table stretches across most of the courtyard, with wooden chairs and barrels arranged all around. On the table are hard loaves of bread, needing a knife to chop them apart. A big pot of pottage sits in the middle, bubbling with vegetables, beans, and a few pieces of lamb. Steam rises, carrying a rich aroma with a faint burnt scent from the bottom of the pot. A whole roasted pig rests on a wooden tray, its skin golden and crisp, still giving off steam. Guests line up for their share, one piece of meat and a slice of bread each. An old woman adds more broth to the children's bowls so they can eat more easily. Honey wine is poured continuously into wooden cups, passed from hand to hand. Laughter, voices calling out, and spoons clinking against bowls blend into the sound of the feast. A guest proudly announces he has brought a jar of well-aged cheese. The cheese is cut into small pieces, its strong smell drifting. Across the left side of the table, a child takes a bite, grimaces, and quickly gives the rest to his older brother Dot at the corner of the table. There's a plate of golden honey cakes, attracting both children and adults. A few guests break the cakes with their hands, sticky honey dripping down their fingers. The sounds of chewing, slurping soup, and chatter constantly overlap. A man stands to raise his cup, toasting the couple in a loud, clear voice. Everyone shouts blessings together, then drinks it all in one go. A group of young men race to eat quickly, treating it like a game. A mother cuts small pieces of meat for her child, soothing them with a smile. Near the fire, the smell of freshly roasting meat draws more guests closer. A cook turns the meat on a spit, fat dripping onto the coals with a hiss. Freshly baked bread is brought out, steaming hot but still quite hard. A guest jokes that his teeth will break. Before he finishes the bread, the bride is invited to take the first bite, followed by the groom, to share a cup of wine. As is the village custom, a few guests grab extra meat when no one is watching. The clatter of bowls and plates echoes across the courtyard. A cat prowls around the table, hoping someone will drop a piece of meat. Children gather at the honey cake corner, eating and giggling. Wine keeps being poured, the atmosphere becoming warmer and noisier. A male guest sings a short tune, making the whole table clap along. An old woman tells the story of her own wedding, making those nearby laugh. The sound of ladles scooping soup rings out without pause. A guest asks his friend nearby to swap seats so he can be closer to the food. The bride and groom continue receiving blessings from each table in turn. At the far corner, a group of guests begin talking about this year's harvest. Children run around, still holding bread or pieces of meat. The atmosphere is both cozy and chaotic, exactly like a village festival. Everyone has their own story, but all share this feast together. And as the stew pot nears empty, the after-meal festivities begin to take shape. Someone shouts to start a tug-of-war game in the middle of the village square. A large rope is brought out, smelling old and sweaty from previous use. Teams split to each side, laughing as they try to find solid footing on the slippery ground. Cheers erupt everywhere, with children squeezing in close to the front row. One side slips first, pulling the whole group down on top of each other. Laughter bursts out, mixed with the sound of dirt splattering onto clothes. Without a break, a group of young men start a wrestling match to grapple amid loud cheers, dust clouding one corner of the yard. A strong throw sends both tumbling close to the honey cake table. Children quickly snatch up the pieces of cake that fall to the ground. Near the fire, a guest tries juggling a wine jar but slips, spilling a little. The scent of honey spreads, attracting a few buzzing bees round the table. Someone brings out a lute and begins playing a cheerful tune. A group of guests sing along while tapping spoons against the table. The bride is pulled in to play a ring toss game, smiling even as she misses every time. The groom gives it a try, but the ring catches on the leg of a nearby chair. Laughter roars when a guest trips over a wooden barrel, luckily only losing balance. A sack race is organized, the sacks made from coarse burlap with a faint smell. The young men hop unsteadily, some falling face first, sending dust into the air. Spectators cheer loudly, calling out the names of people they know. A group of children decide to run around the yard, shouting as they go. An old woman shakes her head with a smile, handing her grandchild a piece of cake. The music grows faster, blending with non-stop laughter. A guest attempts a somersault, landing on shaky feet. The crowd applauds warmly, no matter the outcome. A young man tries to eat the biggest piece of meat in one go, making the whole table stare. A long arises when he nearly finishes it. Then he bursts out laughing in triumph. A dog sneaks onto the banquet table, grabbing a piece of meat before being noticed. Shouts rise as someone chases after the dog, but it disappears into a narrow alley. The bride and groom are invited to stand in the center of a circle for the opening dance. Their steps are slow but steady, following the rhythm of the lute and clapping hands. Guests gradually join the circle, turning the village square into an impromptu dance floor. An elderly guest steps in, performing a few moves that make everyone laugh unnoticed. A child playing near the water barrel tips over a full bucket, A corner of the yard becomes slippery, causing a few near falls as people walk by. The ring toss game continues, this time hitting the target to loud cheers. Another group starts a game of tossing a ball made from tightly bound rags. The ball bounces out, rolling to the groom's feet, making him laugh as he tosses it back. The noisy, joyful atmosphere fills the whole village, with everyone joining in the fun. And amid the laughter and music, the feast gradually shifts to the part where songs are sung in honor of the newlyweds. When the games calm down, an elderly guest stands holding a cup of wine. He begins blessing the couple with wishes for long life, good health, and abundant harvests. Guests all raise their cups together in response, the words blessings ringing out loudly. An old woman wishes the bride to have children soon, making a few people laugh. The groom blushes, bowing his head in thanks before the crowd. A young man chimes in, wishing the couple enough teeth to eat bread for life. Laughter erupts, especially from those missing a few teeth. A little girl shyly presents the bride with a freshly braided flower crown from that morning. The bride bends down to receive it, smiling and placing it on her head immediately. The sound of the lute plays again, beginning the part where songs are sung for blessings. The song tells the story of how the couple met at a village festival. The lyrics are simple, but the cheerful rhythm makes everyone clap along. A deep male voice sings about love lasting even through the harsh winter. Soft drum beats accompany the song, keeping the rhythm steady. A group of women sing in response, teasing the groom about working hard to provide for his family. Laughter slips in between the verses, yet the melody continues to flow. A young man sings about tending sheep, skillfully weaving in wishes for happiness. The whole crowd joins in at the final chorus, their voices echoing across the square. Children imitate the singing, even if they can't keep the beat. A guest raises his cup, drinks it empty, and shouts, "Sing another." This time, the song mentions rainy days, harvest seasons, and even today's wedding feast. The tempo picks up, making everyone sway along. An old woman taps the beat with a wooden spoon on the table, never missing a note. The bride and groom hold hands, smiling as they hear each verse dedicated to them. An elderly guest says this song will be remembered for many years to come. Someone chimes in jokingly that if they sing too long, the roast meat will get cold. Laughter breaks out again, dissolving the brief moment of solemnity. The music softens, leaving a warm afterglow in the air. Everyone clinks glasses one last time before moving on to the evening feast. And so, the blessings, songs, and laughter still linger in the square as evening begins to fall. As the music fades, the bride and groom find a small spot behind the banquet table. They sit on a wooden bench, sharing a slice of still warm honey cake. The sweet scent of honey mingles with the smoky smell clinging to their wool clothes. The groom quietly asks the bride if she's tired, receiving a nod and a smile in return. The torchlight shines on their faces, casting shadows on the wooden wall. Laughter and conversation still drift from the crowded square. A cat creeps closer, hoping someone will drop a piece of meat. The bride runs her hand through her hair, her flower crown slightly askew after hours of festivity. The groom adjusts his belt, the worn spot now more visible in the torchlight. They both look toward the banquet table, where guests are still eating non-stop. The sound of a plate breaking rings out, but they just laugh instead of flinching. The groom pours more honey wine into a cup and hands it to the bride first. The bride takes a small sip, then sets the cup down on the knife-scarred wooden table. A child runs past, nearly knocking over the cup, but misses it just in time. They exchange a look that silently admits today has been a long day out in the square. Music plays again, this time a slower melody. The groom extends his hand, inviting the bride to stand. They step into the square, joining the guests' dancing circle. Their steps are gentle, in time with the lute and drum beats. A few whistles cheer them on, making the bride blush, but keep smiling. The night breeze carries the scent of roast meat and wine, mixed with the chill of the fields. A torch flickers, its light swaying with the wind. The bride tilts her head up at the star-filled sky, breathing out a thin mist. The groom focuses on holding her hand tightly, afraid of losing her in the crowd. An Elderly guest cuts in, spinning the groom around before laughing heartily. The bride is led aside by an old woman who shares a few stories from the past. When they meet again, they find each other in the center of the circle as if they'd never parted. The slow singing and music surround them both. The groom whispers something into her ear, making the bride laugh. A strong gust of wind blows through, tilting a torch but leaving it burning. They stop at the edge of the square, watching everyone continue having fun. A group of children chase each other, their laughter echoing through the corner of the village. The smell of smoke from the banquet kitchen still lingers, even though most of the food has been cleared. The groom hands the bride a thin cloak, placing it over her shoulders. The bride adjusts it, thanking him with a warm look. The torches grow dimmer, but the sound of chatter and laughter hasn't faded. A guest starts singing the melody of the earlier blessing song again. They stand side by side, looking out over the square, now with fewer people. This peaceful moment lasts only a few minutes before someone calls them back, and so they return to the crowd, continuing the evening feast still waiting. In one corner of the yard, a group of guests have drunk enough to forget they're at a wedding. They sing loudly, sometimes offbeat, but still clap along with each other. A staggering guest stands to give another toast, but forgets the words. Laughter breaks out when he replaces it with, "Let's just drink more." An old woman sits near the fire, telling young girls the story of her own wedding. In her tale, she slips in advice about keeping the household warm with love. A young man whispers something to his friend, and both burst into laughter. A cup of wine spills onto the table, quickly wiped up with the old tablecloth. A guest sneaks another bite while the person next to them isn't looking. On the edge of the square, a few people sit apart, talking about next year's harvest. A child falls asleep on their mother's lap, still clutching a piece of bread. Near the doorway, a guest teaches a group of young men how to toss rings onto an empty bottle. Cheers go up when someone lands a throw, making the whole group jump in excitement. A woman takes her child outside for fresh air, away from the smell of wine in the yard. Along the last row of seats, a few people pour more wine for each other. A guest leans against a post, eyes half closed, still holding his cup. Someone starts tapping a beat on a wooden barrel, drawing a few scattered voices to sing along. A young man finds a quiet spot to ready his loosened shoe. The sound of a knife cutting cake comes from the banquet table, mixed with the clinking of dishes. A guest shows off a freshly sharpened knife, a gift from his father. Meanwhile, children gather in a dark corner, sharing the last bits of honey cake. Near the entrance, someone plays a soft tune alone on a lute. The groom is pulled to a corner to hear a long story from his uncle. The bride is surrounded by a group of women, asking questions and complimenting her dress. A guest quietly refills his own jug from the communal wine barrel. The smell of smoke from a small fire on the village's edge mixes with the sweet scent of wine in the air. A few people start standing up, looking for a spot to continue singing. A guest leaves the table, staggering, but still smiling. Amid the noise, there are still quiet moments among small groups in conversation. Then the drums sound again, signaling the feast is nearing its end. As the final drumbeat fades, the square begins to empty. A few guests remain seated, but most are getting up to leave. On the table, chipped ceramic plates still hold crumbs of bread and traces of meat fat. Wooden cups lie scattered, some still with a bit of honey wine inside. Flags on the church roof still flutter, but no one is left to watch. A group of men gather the tables and chairs, dragging them toward the storage shed. The scraping of chairs on the dry ground echoes sharply. Children, exhausted, lie with their heads resting on their parents' coats. The smell of kitchen smoke slowly fades, leaving only the cold scent of night. The bride removes her flower crown, placing it on the table like a final period to a long day. The groom removes his belt, rubbing the red mark on his waist. An old woman wraps the remaining cake in a cloth to take home. A few men gather leftover firewood, stacking it neatly for the next use. The conversation grows quieter, giving way to the sound of wind passing through the trees. A cat returns to the banquet table, Searching for leftover scraps, some torches are extinguished, leaving only a few lit near the gate. An elderly guest pats the groom's shoulder, wishing him a good night and no dreams about washing dishes. Tired laughter rings out, then quickly fades into the night. The bride puts on another cloak and leaves the square with her husband. They pass the last few people still clearing tables. A group of young men roll empty barrels away, joking about the afternoon's games. Scraps of cloth from the tug-of-war still lie on the ground. A broken plate sits untouched in the corner. The last guests leave. Only a few fading footsteps remain. Night covers the village in a quiet darkness. The smell of wine and roasted meat still clings to the clothes of those cleaning up. A mother carries her sleeping child silently home. The wind stirs the last tablecloth. Left behind, the bride and groom disappear around the bend, leaving the square empty. The last torch is extinguished with a bucket of water. A faint hiss is heard, then silence. Only the moonlight remains on the ground, reflecting footprints and patches of mud. The last workers lock the storage shed and secure the latch. The whole village sinks into silence, as if the day's music and laughter never happened. An owl calls in the distance. Breaking the stillness, the banquet table stands empty, with only a few crumbs scattered. Night covers the thatched roofs, blending everything into the same dark shade. The kitchen cleaner washes the stew pot quickly, cold water numbing their hands. A broken chair is left leaning against the wall, waiting to be fixed another day. Empty wine bottles are lined up under the table. Light spills from a few houses, showing some people are still awake. The sound of a wooden door closing and a latch fastening is clear in the quiet air. On the dirt road, the marks of cart wheels remain deep. Another gust of wind carries the smell of damp grass and ash. The last footsteps fade away toward the fields. The night returns to the village's original silence. No more music, no more laughter, only wind and insects. The wedding is over, leaving memories in everyone's mind. Tomorrow, the village will return to its daily work, but tonight, everyone carries home a story to tell for years to come. The sun has just risen, the first light shining through the thatched roofs of the houses. A rooster crows again, sounding lonelier than yesterday. The square where the feast took place still holds footprints and patches of dry mud. Tables and chairs are stacked neatly, but crumbs of bread and bits of meat remain scattered. A cat scratches at the ground, searching for anything still edible. The smell of last night's cooking fire still lingers in the morning air. The bride steps into the yard, her wedding dress replaced by the familiar rough fabric gown. The groom carries 2 buckets of water, walking to the well as he does every day. There is no music, no drums, only the sound of footsteps on the damp ground. An old woman sweeps her yard, gathering leaves and wilted wildflowers. The children are already up, some running around playing, others helping their parents clean up. A broken chair is brought out for repair, new nails clicking into place. Wooden cups are washed in a basin of cold water, hands turning red in the morning wind. A man gathers the empty wine bottles, stacking them in the corner of the storage shed. The village market begins, voices of vendors echoing from afar. Everyone talks about yesterday's wedding, mixing compliments with playful teasing. The bride and groom receive a few late congratulations from those who couldn't attend. A child proudly shows off a piece of honey cake saved from the day before. On the dirt road, the cart tracks have been blurred by wind and footsteps. An old guest drops by to return a cup borrowed last night. The cook is scrubbing the big pottage pot, the burnt bottom still stubbornly black. A faint burnt smell lingers, reminding everyone of yesterday's long feast. A group of young men gather in the open field, discussing a new game. Laughter rings out, but softer and less frequent than on the wedding day. The bride rinses her wildflower crown in a basin, petals falling into the water. The groom checks his belt strap, getting ready for a day's work. A few neighbors stop by to greet them, bringing some vegetables and bread. A rooster stands on the fence, flapping its wings to call the flock. The empty courtyard is lit by sunlight shining on damp patches of earth. No one is in a hurry, but everyone slowly returns to their own work. Hammering sounds echo from the carpenter's house at the edge of the village. The shepherd has already gone to the fields. The sound of bells fading into the distance. A group of women wash clothes by the stream, gossiping about the bride's dress. A tablecloth stained with honey is hung to dry on the fence. The village resumes its normal rhythm, as if the wedding were only a short dream, but its traces still linger in every rattled story. The children compete to recall the tug-of-war and the honey cake. The adults remember most fondly the cups of wine and the singing. The sun climbs higher, its light covering the whole village. And so you have walked through every moment of a 14th century European village wedding, from the morning preparations filled with roosters' calls and the smell of mud, to the long church ceremony, from the muddy wedding procession to a feast of pottage and honey cake, to the lively games. You've heard laughter mixed with the sound of breaking plates, and blessings that were both heartfelt and odd. You've followed them through slow dances, private moments, and drunken guests. Then the feast ended, tables and chairs were stacked, and the next morning the village returned to its routine. Everything carried on as if there had been no music and torchlight all night long. But the scent of the hearth fire, the sound of the lute, and the taste of honey wine still linger somewhere. You might remember the image of the wildflower crown on the bride's hair and the groom's loose boots. Or perhaps you'll remember more vividly the hard bread and week-long pottage. You might even recall the tug-of-war and the cat stealing meat in the crowd. Either way, this is a true picture of how people once celebrated love without electricity or cameras. No imported roses, no custom-made wedding dress from a famous tailor, only wooden tables, wooden cups, wildflowers, and laughter echoing over muddy ground. So, if someone asks you whether you'd like to attend such a wedding, you'll remember the smoke, the roasted meat, the offbeat music, and the wobbly wooden chairs, and you'll think about bringing a good pair of boots and an empty stomach. But if you prefer grandeur and comfort, perhaps this is not the place for you. Yet if you want to experience genuine laughter and simple joy, try it once. Just remember to bring a little curiosity, and perhaps you'll return with a story to tell for life.
Hi guys, how are you today? If you're sitting on your bed, sipping coffee and watching this video, then savor that feeling just a little longer. Because in just a few minutes, you'll be pulled back 3,000 years to a time when coffee didn't exist and beds were made of stone. Today, I'll guide you into a role, not a pharaoh, not a prophet, but a concubine. Not the main one, you're number 34 out of 97, and he barely remembers your name. You live in a golden palace, but can only step out when summoned, and must retreat when someone more important arrives. People think concubines live in luxury, but have you ever wondered if you're chosen only for your looks and forgotten when you're not pretty enough? Is that really living? Each day, you must learn to smile at people you don't trust, and stay silent even when you feel exposed. What do you think will happen if tomorrow morning, the pharaoh wakes up and decides he wants someone new? There's no warning and no apology. Everything in the palace can change, except your place on the power ladder. You may be praised today and forgotten tomorrow, but still, you must wear your makeup like it's your first day being noticed. They write poems for queens, paint goddesses on walls, but no one tells the story of concubines. Today I will, not to romanticize it, but to show you the quietest roles are often the ones that decide who survives. If you're feeling short of breath, that's normal. Your room has no window, and the incense ran out yesterday. Above you is a stone ceiling. Beneath you is a straw mat covered in linen, more luxurious than a slave, but far beneath a sacred cat. Are you ready? If not, that's fine. No one here waits for you to adjust. But if you want to continue, just take a deep breath, like every concubine has done before opening her eyes each morning. And if you enjoy this style of storytelling, don't hesitate to follow, only if you truly want to walk with me to the end of this palace. We'll start in the room where you just woke up, where every gaze turns away except for the lice and the cat. There's no magic in this story, only perfumed oils, crushed charcoal, and smiles more rehearsed than any dance. This could be your first day, or your last, as an Egyptian concubine. You wake up with an aching back, not from a bad dream, but from the hard, damp straw mat beneath you. The scent around you is a mix of cold stone, dried sweat, and leftover oil from yesterday's ritual, a perfume with no name. The first light doesn't come from a window, there are none, but from a crack in the loft ceiling, just enough to catch dust. You pull your legs in, trying not to disturb the cat sleeping by your pillow. It's worshipped, but you're not so sure about yourself. Your hair is tangled in clumps. Stuck to your forehead, you slept like someone afraid of being forgotten if you lay too still. Footsteps echo in the hallway, heels tapping on stone, each step reminding you that the only thing approaching is roll call. You sit up, not because you're ready, but because staying down won't make life any better. No one wakes you up. Everyone's too busy securing their own place on the invisible ladder to favor. Your feet are cold. The stone floor absorbs heat like the hand of death reaching out each morning. You grope for the old linen cloth hanging by the water jar, clean enough to wash your face, dirty enough to leave your skin dry and tight. One shoulder aches. Maybe you slept on a pebble last night, but you don't have the right to complain to a rock. Drums sound from outside, 3 steady beats, announcing that today will be exactly like yesterday. You get up, stepping over 3 pairs of legs, still hoping for one more minute of sleep. This room runs on other people's breath. No curtains, no privacy, just a chipped clay jar to greet you good morning if you wake up late. You glance at your belongings. The chipped jar of lip color is still there, and so is the comb with missing teeth. Every item you own is proof that you're still here, even though no one ever asked if you wanted to stay or leave. Sometimes you wonder, if you disappeared tomorrow morning, would anyone even notice? But then the cat meows softly, and somehow that feels like enough reason to get up again. A young maid passes by the door, says nothing, places a tray of cold water down, then vanishes like smoke. That's all you'll get this morning. 1 cup of water, 1 passing glance, and a few minutes to remind yourself you're still alive. You look into the water, see your blurred reflection, not because it's dirty, but because your eyes don't dare look straight for longer than 3 seconds. Once you tried looking closely and saw features fading day by day. Since then, you no longer linger. You take a deep breath, run your fingers through your hair, and wonder, what kind of smile should I wear today to be remembered? In this room where no one teaches anything, you learn how to survive by watching those who've lasted longer. Some rise early, some rise beautiful. You try to rise without breathing too loudly, so as not to disturb the air. Footsteps sweep past the hallway again, quicker this time. Someone may have been summoned. Could be you. You move toward the door, and not because you want to, but because staying would raise questions. The stone tiles under your feet are just as cold as the first time you stepped in. That feeling has never changed. You don't know how today will unfold. But one thing's certain. Last night's sleep wasn't enough to recover. A new day begins not with sunlight, but with a ritual no one ever asked if you wanted to perform. You leave the room like a shadow, except shadows have the right to stay still if they don't want to move forward. Down the corridor, other concubines are walking too one by one, as if all heading the same way without knowing the destination. No one says a word. Everyone's busy reviewing what needs fixing, or what might make them stand out more than yesterday. You know the overseer's eyes are watching. They don't need to speak. They just note who's late, who smudged eyeliner, who yawned. You glance to the side. Concubine number 33's blush is heavy today. You're unsure if that's boldness or desperation. Footsteps echo steadily between 2 stone walls, where there's no music, only the rhythm of silent competition. A breeze sneaks in through a small vent, just enough to remind you there's blue sky outside, but not for you. The room ahead is brighter. It means you're near the place where lines are formed. You take one last breath, trying not to shiver, not out of fear, but from the cold. And then you step into that light, where a concubine's day begins not with greetings, but with a single look. In the room to the left, they call it the cleansing area, though you've never seen it truly clean. The walls still were the color of old stone. The water sits in jars, stagnant, cold, and unchanged. You remove your cloth and step toward the shared basin. Yesterday it washed a god's statue. Today it's your turn. The scent of leftover incense mixes with mildew, as if you're bathing in a forgotten dream. Your hand touches the water cold as if stored in the pyramid's basement. You don't gasp, not because you're used to it, but because no one is allowed to complain in the morning. Someone is waiting behind you. Could be number 35 or someone with more privilege. You wipe your face, scoop water through your hair, not wet enough to be clean, but tangled enough to resist brushing. An old maid once said, "Cold water is good for the skin." She vanished 3 days later, so no one confirmed if that was true. You apply a layer of powdered stone to your face, or not to look pale, but to cover what must be hidden when light hits at an angle. Your eyes need to be redrawn. The black pigment is made from burnt ash and resin, a mixture that beautifies while stinging your eyes. You once heard that drawing eyes like the god Horus would grant protection, though no one ever said from what. Your lips are dry, so you use the leftover honey from yesterday's ritual? If you're lucky, no ants will show up. There is no mirror, only water, and water always makes you look more faded than you truly are. You dry your face with a thin cloth old, frayed, and once owned by someone who's no longer in the palace. Every motion is swift and precise, and not because you're in a hurry, but because you've done it unconsciously every day. You once hoped brushing your hair and applying perfume would bring joy, but now, the only feeling is just getting it over with. The scent on your neck is no longer fresh. It lingers from yesterday and the day before. A small red mark appears on your neck, maybe from scratching, or maybe from a loose thread in the cloth brushing you as you slept. You want to ask someone if it's visible, but stop. Everyone is too busy with their own faces. Everyone is polishing the fragile shell they hope will make them stand out. But what gets you chosen isn't makeup. It's the gaze of someone you're not allowed to look back at. You dab a bit of resin on your wrist, then hide it under your sleeve like a thin charm. Once, a concubine told you, if he doesn't notice you, at least let the scent arrive first. You didn't believe her, but you still do it today, not out of hope, but because you don't know what else to do. A maid brings a wooden box. Inside are a few combs, a pumice stone, and some oil-soaked fabric scraps. You choose the comb with the most teeth intact, brushing through hair that still holds grains of sand from a courtyard ritual 3 days ago. Each stroke of the comb makes your hair sigh, or maybe it's you sighing. You can't really tell anymore. You lift your chin, straighten your back, or not to look more beautiful, but to seem less like someone who just woke up from stone. Outside, the sunlight begins to shine into the hallway, signaling it's time for someone to be summoned. Maybe it's you. You put everything back in the box, wrapping up what's called self-care in just 5 minutes. Everything is fast, everything is quiet, because everyone knows. Those who are slow are the ones whose names are forgotten. A voice calls out, not your name, but close enough. You have to go. You stand at the threshold, dress smoothed, face finished, eyes emptied of emotion. You don't know what you'll witness today, or whether someone will witness you, but you know for sure, if you show you're tired or worried, you'll become invisible to those who matter. You take a deep breath. The scent of rotting wood, faded perfume, and limestone surrounds you. The smell of power mixed with waiting. Your feet touch the stone floor for the how many th time you've lost count, but it's still as cold as the first. Faint music begins from the main hall, steady beats like the heartbeat of a ritual in which you are just one small detail. And so you go, not to stand out, but because here, if you don't step forward, you'll be stepped over. The courtyard where breakfast is served lies between 2 stone corridors. Sunlight pours in, but never enough to feel pleasant. In front of you is a thin bronze tray, no name, no rank, and not many options either. A piece of flatbread as dry as old hope, a pale cup of honey, and a glass of water, warm and murky. They call it a meal for the chosen, though you've never known who actually chooses the menu. You reach to break the bread, and your first thought is, it won't tear. It snaps, then falls. You try dipping it in honey, but the liquid has thickened like it's been sitting since the festival 3 weeks ago. The honey sticks to your fingers, then picks up dust from your sleeve. Now it's sweet with a touch of old fabric. You look around. Everyone eats as if they know there won't be a second meal today. No one talks while eating, not out of manners, but because food is so scarce that no one wants to be distracted. Once you coughed during a meal, And ever since you've been told, be careful, don't waste it, you take a sip of water unsure whether it's boiled, filtered, or from yesterday's temple basin. Your throat remains dry or not due to lack of water, but because you stopped expecting anything from drinking long ago. Another concubine sits nearby, her makeup heavy, eyes unblinking. She eats slower than you. Perhaps she knows eating fast won't get you remembered any sooner. You're still learning that. A maid walks by, her footsteps trailed by incense, like a quiet form of mockery. You try to finish your meal, not out of hunger, but to keep your hands from looking idle if someone glances over. Sometimes you think, if today's the last day, I should at least eat properly. But with what? The flatbread crumbles in your hand, and honey clings beneath your nails, not enough to enjoy, not little enough to forget. You wipe your hands on the cloth covering the tray, something that may have once belonged to someone far more important. Again, you glance around, not searching for a friend, but to see who is being noticed. Concubine number 12 doesn't eat today. She just sits and stares, and you're not sure if it's strategy or a sign she's fading. But you're still eating and still being watched, so you still exist. In the morning light, the overseer's gaze sweeps across like sunlight, slicing the surface of water. You pretend not to notice, but after living here long enough, you know that gaze always carries a mental checklist. A list of who smiled on cue, who ate slowly, who wore crooked makeup, who didn't bow low enough, even who broke their bread or ate it whole. You didn't think it mattered until someone disappeared. Once you asked an older concubine, "Why does breakfast make everyone so quiet?" She smiled, didn't look at you, and said, "Because it's the only time you can sit without acting." You're not sure if it was advice or a reminder that every moment is being watched. Finished, you stand up, not too quickly, not too slow, just enough to avoid standing out among 10 others heading the same way. The tray is left behind, no one looks back. Breakfast is over, and the next contest is about to begin. You leave the courtyard, your throat still carries the bland sweetness, and your heart feels as empty as the untouched bread. A thought crosses your mind. Will there be lunch today? Then you answer yourself, only if someone remembers your name. As you walk, your fingers touch your wrist, where honey still clings, as a way to remember you just existed sweetly. The honey sticks to your skin like a thin memory, easy to lose, but just enough to make you feel you're trying. A speck of dust falls onto the old tray, you see it, and wonder, maybe it was once part of a grander meal. You step past the threshold of the hallway, where the sun is now high. It's no longer early, and you're still unsure if today is a good or bad day. Your feet keep moving forward, but your mind stays behind with the tray you just let go of. That was breakfast. The meal outsiders think is the lightest part of a concubine's day. But for you, it's the easiest thing to swallow, and the hardest to forget. In the small dressing room, light filters through thin cloth, casting a blur that makes everyone look like they stepped out of a shrine painting. But you know the truth, paintings don't itch, and you're trying not to scratch your nape and ruin your hair. Today's dress is made of fine linen, so thin that standing backlit turns everything underneath into public knowledge. They say it flatters the figure, but wearing it, all you feel is cold on your stomach and itch on your back. The tight garment squeezes you into an ideal shape, not your ideal, but the one written by those who defined palace beauty. You bend down to tie the silk band at your waist, not too tight, because you need to breathe, but not too loose or you'll look like you're not trying. Your wrist glitters with bronze bracelets, but red marks still linger from yesterday. A thin strap rubs against your shoulder, reminding you your skin's been raw for days, and you still haven't been given a new dress. They say concubines have entire wardrobes, but you have 3 sets, rotating in this order. Freshly clean, nearly clean, still wearable. Today is nearly clean. You take a breath, and the familiar stale scent hits instantly: sweat, powder, and something uniquely yours. You subtly adjust your hem, a subconscious move you make every day, as if it's the only thing you can control. The back of your neck still itches, a dull sensation, not painful, but persistent like a rumor. You used to think it was your hair, but after seeing a few tiny bugs fall from your comb, you understood. A maid once whispered, Lice are a condition, not a disease. You didn't laugh because you didn't know where to aim it. In the palace, everyone smells pleasant, but only from afar. Up close, you smell real skin, damp fabric, and tiny creatures that never give up. You don't dare scratch, because scratching is admitting. Instead, you tilt your head occasionally, as if checking your hairstyle. Sometimes you wonder, how does a place full of stone, incense, and perfume become heaven for lice and fleas? But then you remember, no one washes clothes daily, and sunlight doesn't linger long enough here to clean anything. The dress you're wearing is embroidered with lotus flowers, a symbol of purity, but your back is drenched in sweat. Once, you saw a concubine use clay powder to absorb odor in her dress. She vanished 2 days later from an allergic reaction. You still use that method, but less, just enough to not feel like you're melting in the sun. A decorative stone necklace hangs at your neck, heavy, cool, and useless against the itch. Sometimes you forget where you are, not from daydreaming, but because this outfit is so tight that every move must be calculated. You lower your head slightly to check the back of your dress, not for modesty, but for yesterday's stain. Dress adjusted, hair brushed, smile ready, and the itch still there. You step into the hallway where sunlight lands. From afar, you resemble a living statue. But statues don't sweat, don't itch, and don't worry about fabric sticking to their thighs in the heat. With each step, you feel like you're wearing a costume, thin, beautiful, and utterly unreal. Footsteps echo behind you. Someone else has stepped out with you. They smell better, or so you think. You slow down, and not for grace, but to stop the fabric clinging to your back from slipping into view. A maid passes, holding another set of clothing. It smells better than you imagined. Probably meant for someone ranked a few spots ahead of you. You pretend not to see. Here, not seeing means not hurting. The sun in the courtyard is now harsh. You feel sweat threading through fabric like a warning. Move carefully. One sneeze at the wrong time, one bead of sweat in the wrong place, could be the only thing people remember about you today. You blink, then wonder, am I really living, or just wearing the same mask every morning? No one answers, only a new itch now blooming on the right side of your neck. You stand tall, adjust your sleeve, and turn toward the light. In that glow, at least things appear cleaner. They say beauty requires sacrifice, but they've never worn sheer linen among lice and scrutiny. You step forward not because you're ready, but because your dress is fixed, and your hands have nothing left to do. And like every day, you hope, if not chosen, then at least don't get caught scratching. You've painted your lips, lined your eyes, applied perfume. Now the only thing left to perfect is your smile. But behind that smile lies a battlefield only you know, sore teeth, swollen gums, and breath that hasn't been sweet since last month. No toothpaste, no toothbrush, only salt, ash, and sometimes leaves rumored to whiten teeth. You once tried chewing date skin. It freshened your mouth for a minute, then left a taste like old gravel. Every morning, you swish hot water, hot enough not to burn, yet not hot enough to kill anything. One day, you bit into stale bread and heard a sound like wood cracking from inside your mouth. A front tooth once wobbled for 2 weeks before you learned to smile with a tilted head to hide it. No one in the palace asks if your teeth hurt, because smiling is duty, not emotion. You once saw a concubine faint during a dance. They said it was windstroke, but you knew the blood from her mouth was real. You breathed softly, careful not to let secrets from your mouth drift too far. The mouthwash here is made of spices and scented ash. It burns your throat, but at least masks your own odor. Once, you skipped the rinse, and the look from someone nearby made you feel you'd committed a silent sin. You've learned to speak less, smile on cue, and never open your mouth unless absolutely needed. An ulcer on your lower gum has been with you for half a month. You gave it a name like a roommate. When you swallow, the faint taste of blood reminds you, don't bite down hard. Each night, you sleep on your side, careful not to let your swollen jaw press the mat. One slip, and you can't eat in the morning. No one in the palace mentions dental pain, because saying it out loud means admitting your appearance is no longer perfect. You once dreamed of someone healing you, But the only thing you received was a dried mint sprig from 3 seasons ago. You heard sorcerers can numb gums with sap, but those treated are ranked dozens above you. An old maid once secretly gave you clay mixed with root. You tried it once, then decided the pain was easier than that taste. Sometimes, when the pain eases, you feel lucky. At least you haven't lost a tooth in the middle of a ceremony. But luck is a fragile thing, and teeth don't grow back when you live in the palace. On the day you were summoned near the throne, you only hoped not to smile too long. Not out of fatigue, but fear that a tooth might fall out. They looked at you and said, "That smile is poetry." They didn't know you were clenching your hand to stop your gums from bleeding. You thought, if you could ask for one privilege, it would be silence, no speaking, no chewing, no pretending you're okay. But concubines don't have the right to choose silence. Silence means you've been replaced, not that you're resting. So you keep talking, smiling, enduring, as if your mouth weren't a battlefield. You tell yourself, tomorrow will be better. The teeth will feel better. But deep down, it's just how you stop yourself from screaming now. One last time, you look at your reflection in water, lips still pink, eyes still bright. And the pain is learned to hide just like you have. You turn away, walking on with that smile. Not to charm anyone, but to look like someone still worth noticing. After enough smiling and touching up, you're taken to what they call the training room. There are no large mirrors, no instructors, just a flute, a few gestures, and a series of watchful eyes. You begin moving to the rhythm, not out of love for it, but because no one survives long if they miss a step. A maid beats the drum steadily. It's not loud, but it feels like every beat marks your mistakes inside your head. Right hand up, left foot out, every imperfect move will be remembered, even if unspoken. You once thought being a concubine meant waiting to be chosen. But waiting is only part, the rest is rehearsing without error. Some days you dance for 4 hours straight with no one watching, but you still dance, because someone might be secretly observing. Just like you eat breakfast, not to be full, but because someone is looking. You dance and not from passion, but to be remembered. Your hand aches from holding the fan too long. Your shoulders throb from staying upright, but no one asks if you need rest. You once tried to sit down from dizziness. The result was being excused from dance for 2 days, with a look colder than the Nile breeze. When not dancing, you practice speech, phrasing, tone, and silence when silence is best. One exercise. Learn to listen in a way that makes others feel pleased. No one teaches it. Fail and you disappear. You were once asked to smile with your eyes. You're still unsure if you did it right, but you're still here, so maybe not entirely wrong. Another day, you were summoned for singing practice, not to sing loudly, but to make sure your voice never escapes closed walls. They say singing is to touch emotions, but here, emotions must be filtered before turning into sound. It took you a week to learn how to greet an official with your eyes, a bow, and not breathing too deeply. A month to know when to step back, when to stand still, and when to accidentally be present. A year to understand. Nothing you do is to be loved. It's to avoid being dismissed. During a break, you look at your hands, fingers slightly swollen from overdancing, nails chipped at the corners. You see number 41 practicing poetry. She said one word wrong and had to relearn the entire piece. No one comforts, no one helps. Everyone carries their lesson like a rock tucked in their robe, heavy, but not to be dropped. Once you saw someone break into tears. No one scolded her, but the next day she was reassigned to teach dance to junior girls. She never returned, so you learned not to cry, or not because you're strong, but because the watchful eyes might see too much. You learn to remember the names of gods, the habits of superiors, even the rhythm of the tiles beneath your feet. None of it gives you freedom. It only helps you survive a little longer among others learning the same. One day, you read mythology not for curiosity, but because someone said, Pharaoh favors those who understand culture. You're not sure if it's true, but here, every rumor is worth studying. Sometimes that's all it takes to be kept. You can't remember the last time you sat still, not practicing, not performing, not correcting, just being. And then you ask, do I even have a self? or just a version built from endless rehearsals. Some say to live is to do what you love, but here, to live is to do what's asked and do it flawlessly. You leave the training room at noon. Sweat clings to your neck. Powder beneath your eyes starts to smear. You don't have a towel, just the wind and glances that pass by, then turn away. On your way back, you pass a concubine being escorted to meet a guest. She says nothing, just grips her hands tightly. You bow your head without words, because in the palace, any word can become wrong if said at the wrong moment. Once again, you walk the long hallway, where light isn't bright enough, yet still hurts your eyes. You're tired, your mouth is dry, and you're hungry, but you don't stop, because no one's allowed to stop. The work doesn't end with a bell or thanks. It simply pauses until another summons arrives. You no longer feel resentment. You feel used to it, as if this is the real shape of those who want to live longer. Each day you get better, not at dancing or singing or speaking, but at existing without letting anyone see you're tired. And you understand, in the palace, whoever can keep performing, that's who still gets to stand. As you walk past the West Corridor, where few people go, you hear laughter, small, brief, and afraid to echo. A group of children are learning to dance, tiny steps repeated over and over, as if someone is teaching them to survive before they even know what living means. Girls aged 8 or 9, thin, pale, dark-eyed from lack of sleep, still trying to smile to the music. One girl falls while turning. No one helps. She gets up immediately, dusts nothing off, sheds no tears. You were once one of them, a tiny shadow trained to smile before your baby teeth fully grew in. In the palace, girls are taught obedience before they learn to write, and silence before learning to breathe deeply. An old woman sits by the door, hair silver, eyes cloudy, still stitching a cloth no one ordered. They say she was once a concubine. Now she's just someone too old to be remembered by name. No one asks if she had children, if she dreams, or if she wants to leave that room. She sits there every day, watching the children dance, then returns to her sewing, as if trying to stitch herself back together. You once thought that if you lived long enough, you'd get to do something besides perform. But looking at her, you understand. Sometimes living longer only means witnessing more. Not every woman in the palace is chosen, but all are forced to wait. The chosen worry about being replaced. The unchosen worry about being forgotten. Some do hair, write poems, bake bread, stay silent, but no one truly gets to be themselves. A pregnant concubine is led across the courtyard. She holds her belly, eyes avoiding everyone. In the palace, giving birth isn't a celebration. It's a test. If it's a boy, you might stay. If it's a girl, no one knows yet. Someone once whispered, if she's born a girl, teach her to smile before she learns to run. You once asked, has anyone ever left here? The answer was yes, but no one remembers their names. Older women fade into corners, where light doesn't reach, and memories are no longer repeated. Some sew, some teach dancing, some simply wait for the day their names stop being called. In the laundry area, a 10-year-old girl wrings cloth with small, stiff hands. No one helps. You see yourself in her, same height, same way of biting her lip when afraid of making mistakes. You want to ask her name, but remember, no one asks names here without a reason. An older concubine walks by, her posture straight but her gaze hollow, as if emptied years ago. Once you heard her say, when I was young, I longed to see the pharaoh. Now I just hope not to be seen. Another girl sits curled in the courtyard, messy hair, eyes closed, maybe meditating, waiting, or trying to disappear. In the palace, women are a collective sigh, long, steady, and never heard. You pass by a row of rooms. One once belonged to a concubine who died of fever. Now it stores old belongings. Each item was once part of someone, but now no one remembers whose. Sometimes you wonder, if you disappeared, who would notice first, your dresser or the cleaner? In the palace, you are a puzzle piece fitting somewhere, but easily replaced by any piece the same shape. A group of girls are learning speech, voices high, round, and forced like wind shaped into words. You pause for a moment, then turn away. Here, standing too long can be mistaken for daydreaming. Each girl will grow into a version of the woman you're trying to become. And you are just a version of someone who once walked these halls and is now never mentioned. All of them form a long chain, no names, no endings, no part different enough to be its own story. In the palace, no one is born to become someone. They are only taught not to disappear too quickly. They say if you're not pretty enough to be a concubine, you can learn to perfume the dead. You're unsure if that's comfort or cruelty, but once you're in that group, there's no returning to the main courtyard. Someone brews the wine used in rituals. Its scent drifts across the hall, but they're not allowed a single sip. Someone else is in charge of wiping the statues, a task never spoken aloud, but done precisely every single day. There's a group dedicated to scrubbing the stone floors after rituals. Sometimes it's animal blood, sometimes it's unclear. You once saw them crouching to clean, bare hands, gray rags, no one lifting their head even when others walked by. They're not allowed to touch offerings, not allowed to speak to concubines, not allowed to look directly at the statues. But they hear everything: idle talk, whispered names, and the sound of fear. One maid collects wilted flowers from altars. That fading scent clings to her like a perfume of sorrow. You once asked a kitchen worker, "Is it hot in there?" She smiled and said, "Hotter than the stone courtyard at noon." There's someone who prepares ritual porridge, not for eating, just for offering, then discarding. You didn't understand why food was wasted until someone said, "That portion belongs to the gods. No living soul may touch it." An old woman walks with a crutch. She used to carry water from the Nile to the temple for 50 years. Not once did she rest. When she slipped on a stair, they moved her to the awaiting orders group, a place with no work, no name. Every job in the palace is a gamble. None are truly safe. Only some are less visible. You once saw a ritual cleaner in a brown robe, forbidden to cross the red stone line. Yet their eyes always knew who was beyond it. In the kitchen, a girl mixed up spices. 3 days later, she was gone. No one asked. Someone broke a ritual bowl, sent to the inner shrine to assist. No one knows if it was an honor or punishment. Here, mistakes don't need to be written down. They only need to be remembered. And to be remembered is to be removed from all future lines. Someone once said, "Working in the palace is like walking on hot sand. If you stand still, you'll burn. If you run, you'll draw attention." So everyone walks evenly, just fast enough, just quiet enough, just invisible enough not to be called at the wrong time. You look at them, the ones no one praises, no one chooses, and realize, maybe they are the freest people in the palace, because they don't have to look beautiful, don't have to smile, don't have to shine. They just have to keep living in the palace's shadows. In the palace, time isn't measured by holidays or performances, but by the temperature of the stone floor each morning. When it's cold, the tiles exhale a silent chill, not enough to be wind, but enough to creep into your ankles like a warning. You once thought you lived in golden sunlight, but within stone walls, light only proves the sky still exists. Egypt's winters are short, but when they arrive, the cold seeps into your bones before you can find another layer of cloth. Your dress is still as thin as it was in summer, except now, your sweat no longer drips out, but draws inward. At night, you curl beside an empty water jar, not for warmth, but because it's the only place that still holds traces of human heat. A concubine once told you she sleeps with her hands tucked between her thighs to warm her palms. You laughed, then tried it too. No one hands out blankets. No one asks if anyone is cold. In the palace, cold is personal, like toothaches or being forgotten. One morning, you coughed softly. By noon, you were given the day off from dance. You knew it wasn't kindness. It was a sign. Then the cold season leaves, and heat arrives like an impolite god. No knock, no mercy. The air thickens, like each molecule just walked through a smoke-filled ritual and hasn't dissolved yet. The stone under your feet is no longer cold. It burns like a cat's tongue licking your soles through thin sandals. You walk slowly, not out of exhaustion, but to keep your linen dress from sticking to your skin. every step a negotiation with the heat. Long corridors, low ceilings, and no doors to the outside. The air moves like water trapped inside a sealed jar. Each time you yawn, a wave of hot air escapes and makes you wonder, is your body itself now resisting? Sweat doesn't drip. It evaporates instantly, leaving a salty film and a warm scent around your collar. A maid near you, eyes red from incense, wrists drenched, still says, "Today is cooler than yesterday." You nod, not in agreement, but because you're too tired to argue with someone also melting. You once thought, maybe I'll get used to this. But after 5 years, the only thing you've mastered is hiding sweat behind a smile. On festival days, you wear an extra layer of costume, embroidered cloth, gemstone trims, 3-tiered necklaces, under a 42 degrees Celsius sun. Someone once fainted mid-bow. No one caught her. Only her fingers brushed the ground, like apologizing for collapsing at the wrong time. You learn to breathe through your nose, slow and steady, so your lipstick stays in place and no one hears your panting. Each time you stand near the incense burner, you feel like you're being steamed from the inside, like an offering item. One day the sky turned gray, you rejoiced, but the ceiling still held yesterday's heat, and sweat pooled at your nape. On summer nights, the floor stays warm like a cat's belly, except the cat is worshipped, and you are only left alone if forgotten. You dare not complain about the heat, because heat means weakness. Weakness means falling behind, and falling behind is the first step to being replaced. So you say, "What a lovely day," then sit on a stone slab hot enough to fry bread, pretending it's a velvet chair. In the resting room, everyone shares the same scent, the smell of those who live in stone. Eat little, drink little, breathe less. A girl sits near you, back soaked, hair matted, yet she holds her head high, eyeliner intact. You don't know her name, but you remember her eyes, the kind that say, "I can still endure this." In the palace, those who can still endure are those who still get to stand. Those who endure better get to stand closer to the center. And those who can no longer endure are moved to the support group or for offering if the timing is unfortunate. You once thought summer would be easier, no cold, but you realized nothing is easier, only different ways of sweating. In the heat, your smile dries like cracked earth, holding shape, but no longer alive. You begin to dream of breezes, not from meadows, but door cracks, dark corners, anywhere no one is watching. But in the palace, doors never open, and even shadows are already occupied. So you stand in the light, sweaty, sore, itchy, but still beautiful. Each drop of sweat rolling down your chin is unseen effort, silently acknowledged. In this heat, you don't wish for love, just for someone to let you sit down without judgment. But no one allows it, because in the palace, whether it's cold or hot, you must still stand straight, breathe lightly, and smile as if you are the wind. In the Egyptian palace, you're rarely truly alone, even when everyone else has left, because there are tiny creatures clinging to your seams, living in your stitching, and sometimes crawling across your back while you sleep. They're called the unnamed things, because saying their names is bad luck, yet not saying them doesn't stop the biting. You once woke in the middle of the night, not from dreams, but because your nape itched, a kind of itch that feels like something just arrived and stayed. You didn't scream. Any sound at the wrong time is seen as weakness. Instead, you scratched lightly, then stayed still, accepting this as the only roommate who isn't competing with you. The next morning, you look into a water tray and see a faint red mark behind your ear. You ask no one, apply nothing. Another concubine once joked, "Lice prove your hair is thick enough for poetry." You laughed, then scratched. In the palace, everyone smells nice, but fragrance doesn't kill eggs. It only makes them live more luxuriously. You were once given a herbal ointment for your hair, used it 3 times, then got warned about wasting the treasury. Once you saw a bug crawl across your pillow. It stopped right in the middle of a Horus symbol, as if asking for respect. You raised your hand to swat, then hesitated. The blood inside might be yours, or from whoever used the blanket before you. People say, "Don't worry, they won't kill you." But you know, they kill your sleep 1 hour at a time. One concubine got so used to them, she always carried a wooden comb. For silent conversations with the scalp, you asked to borrow it. She said, "No, everyone must keep their own itch secret." You fix yourself, not to be beautiful, but because if you don't fill that gap, someone else will. In the palace, there's no reward for endurance, but those who endure better live longer. You used to think, maybe if I tried harder, I'd be noticed someday. Now you just think, as long as they don't call my name the wrong way, the way you walk, the way you sit, the way you nod, everything has been adjusted until nothing feels like yours anymore. You're no longer ashamed to stand among people better than you, because you no longer feel much at all. One day, you smiled at a cat walking down the hallway. It looked up and walked away. You envied it, could walk away, but you had to stay because you were taught patience is a noble trait. A new girl entered, young, beautiful, radiant. She passed by and asked, "Is it fun here?" You said, "Yes." You weren't lying. When you no longer have expectations, everything becomes easier to accept. Every evening, you rest your hand on your forehead, staring at the stone ceiling, wondering, if I disappeared, how long until someone replaced me? A roommate of yours once left. No one mentioned her again, and her bed was filled that very night. You didn't cry, because if you cry, who will wipe your tears? And if someone does, will they remember why? You learned something. To survive the palace, you don't need to believe in the future. You just need enough calm to get through today. Some days you smile all day, no one asks why. Some days you're silent, no one wonders. You're no longer a person. You're software, programmed by rituals, schedules, and reflexive, "Yes, Your Majesty." They say, women in the palace are protected. But you know, not being touched doesn't mean being loved. You once saw a concubine say the wrong thing. She wasn't scolded, but from that day she disappeared from every list. Since then, you learned to speak less, then even less, then barely at all. You began to measure your worth by whether you were praised or at least not forgotten today. Sometimes that's enough. A maid once asked, "Are you sad?" You replied, "No," and honestly, you weren't sure that feeling existed anymore. You eat, work, sleep, and repeat, no different from the statues around the temple. But statues don't get hungry. Statues don't itch. Statues don't ask, "Am I still alive?" But you do, though those questions grow shorter and the answers grow quieter. Someone once said, if you stop feeling, you stop hurting. You found that only half true, because you no longer feel pain. But whatever replaced it, you can't name. You walk slower now, not from exhaustion, but because there's no reason to hurry. Each step is like a marker of your presence. No praise, no objection, but still worth noting. No one sings in the palace. No one tells stories, and no one talks about those who left. Silence grows thicker, like fog. Not sharp, but seeping into your neck, shoulders, and mind. Sometimes you hear your own breath, and you think, at least I still make a sound. The palace is still lit. The schedule is still steady. You're still here, eating, brushing your hair, bowing, smiling. But somewhere in your mind, something has stepped back. Not dead, but no longer moving forward. Each day you repeat a silent song, no audience, no finale. Outsiders might say, life here must be blissful. You nod, then turn away. In your heart, there's no hope, only routine. And that routine is what's kept you standing in this palace longer than most. No one rewards endurance, but if you endure long enough, you become part of the stone walls. Unshaken, untouched, and no longer needing anything. You understand. Surviving the palace isn't about rising up. It's about not disappearing into silence. And as long as someone calls your name in the morning, you'll keep walking, no dreams, no complaints, no expectations. When the last light withdraws from the hallway, you know, you've survived another day. No one announces it, no one claps, but you still acknowledge it with footsteps heavier back to your bed. The wind slips through the cracks in the wall. Not strong enough to cool you, but enough to chill your neck. The stone floor stays damp. Even on hot days, it always keeps the moisture from old ceremonies. You remove your necklace, Each tiny jingle sounds like a farewell to a role just played. The thin rope comes off not to free you, but to prepare for a sleeping position that avoids too much contact with the floor. You lie on your side, back to the wall, like every night. No one tells you how to face, but everyone sleeps the same way. A concubine in the corner sneezes. No one checks on her. Everyone here is too busy holding their position. A cat meows faintly in the courtyard. It sounds so real, you almost believe it called your name. You close your eyes, not because you're sleepy, but because they started to sting back in the practice room. The left side of your cheek touches the straw mat, dry, rough, but at least it's still yours. Each breath reminds you, you're not dead, but whether this is living, you're not so sure. You don't dream. It's been ages since sleep showed you anything. Just darkness, and then morning. A girl next to you shifts in her sleep. Her back stays straight, even in dreams. Her spine remembers palace posture. You hear light footsteps in the corridor. A maid doing her rounds, or someone being summoned. No one in the room asks. Asking is a sign that someone still has hope. You pull part of your robe over your arm. It's not warmer, but it makes you feel like you're taking care of yourself. A small light on the ceiling, moonlight piercing a hole, landing squarely on your palm. You turn your hand over, as if holding the light means holding on to something that's still yours. Footsteps fade. The final wooden door clicks shut. The day officially ends. No one calls for you. No one waits for you. And you never really waited for anyone either. You whisper your name in your mind. No one hears it. No one repeats it. But you want it to stay inside your memory. Your name used to be etched into a serving tray. Now it's just a faint mark at the bottom of the bronze. You used to be chosen to sing during rituals. Then you weren't. You didn't ask why. Here, there is no reason. Only replacement. You pull your legs in and curl up like every night, the safest shape to avoid bumping or being bumped. A light breeze moves. Sand sifts through the cracks, falling beside your pillow. No one sweeps it. Sand belongs here like you. Someone sighs. You don't know who. Could be you or maybe a dream fading out. You open your eyes one last time. Not to see, just to check if your eyelids still respond. Then you close them again. Breathe slowly and let your body sink into that nameless, quiet peace. No one promises tomorrow will be better, but you also don't wish it worse. In that moment, you understand. You don't need love or to be chosen, you just need to wake up. Not to live a concubine's life, just to see your name still on the morning roll call. You sleep, not for dreams, but because it's the last thing today you can do without pretending. The stone floor grows colder beneath you. The room stills further. Time slides by like an uninvited guest. On the wall, the deity in the painting smiles faintly. You smile back, though no one sees. A day ends. No sadness, no joy, nothing special. But still, a day survived. And for you, that's enough. Not out of gratitude, but because you've stopped expecting more. You sleep, hands still placed where the moonlight shines, like a final reminder, I'm still here. And in the ancient palace of Egypt, the night begins again as it has for millennia. Quietly, coldly, and no name spoken unless necessary. If you're still awake after 480 lines, welcome to the backstage of an ancient dream. A place where all statues are flawless, and everyone living beside them stays silent to fit the frame. You've seen the room, the mat, the falling moonlight, and a body long used to being invisible. Not a goddess, not a destined lover, just a name in line on a list. No prince ever wanders into the palace. No one mistakes you for the queen, and there's no magic. You won't rewrite history. You won't die tragically by a golden river. You'll simply fade with time. The stone tablets once etched with your name were worn away centuries ago. But the dinner token still gets scanned daily. No one tells your story in films, but you might show up blurry in a CGI frame beneath Cleopatra's feet. And if you think modern life is stressful, at least you have shoes, a name card, and a private toilet. Here you can be pretty, but you can't be yourself. You're made up not to look good, but to look identical. You're selected not for your qualities, but for your measurements and silence. Every step aligns with rhythm, not of music, but of unspoken orders from the entire palace. So, if you could choose again, would you want to live in an Egyptian palace? Not to change history, just to feel grains of sand slip past your robe in a suffocating long night. Maybe you'd say yes. Maybe you'd want a taste of glory for just a day. Or maybe you're just tired of utility bills and forgot the value of uneventful peace. Either way, thank you for living through a full day with us as Concubine number 34. If you still think life today isn't so bad, soft beds, hot water, and TikTok, leave us a like. And if you still want to go back to ancient Egypt for that royal experience, no worries. We've got a few spots left. Ha ha ha. Hi guys. Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered, back in the day, people probably didn't feel as pressured about their looks as we do now, right? Well, that's wrong. Completely wrong. Because in the Middle Ages, beauty standards weren't gentle at all, they were pure torture. They didn't have Instagram, but they had beauty standards that, if you tried to follow them, would wear you down day by day, both literally and figuratively. They didn't use photo editing apps, but they used lead-based makeup to whiten their skin, a method that was, well, a slow death. Every noble portrait was basically photoshopped by hand. Your face painted as if you were quietly dying. Every standard came with its share of pain, of hunger, and the pretense that all of it was sophistication. You sure you want to be beautiful medieval style? When having a high forehead meant plucking out every last strand of your bangs with tweezers. If this already feels a bit wrong to you, hit like and subscribe, because the next beauty standards will freak you out even more. Now, come with me back to a world where beauty wasn't in the eye of the beholder, it was in the hands tightening the corset strings. And you'll see, sometimes being naturally ugly was a privilege people back then were never allowed to have. They called it elegance, nobility, uniqueness. But in truth, it was just a way of accepting pain selectively. Back then, beauty didn't come from liveliness. It came from how much you could resemble a wax figure. The more lifeless you looked, the more admired you were. The paler you were, the less emotion you showed, the more people called you refined. If you were healthy, suntanned, with messy hair and slightly crooked teeth, sorry, you were a peasant. And peasants had no right to be beautiful, even if you were born with the face of an angel. Because beauty, in those days, wasn't defined for people, it was defined for status. And to have status, you had to leave your comfort behind entirely. In many cases, beauty standards were no different from tiny laws, except more obsessive, more persistent. Laws not written in books, but etched in the eyes of others, in the banquet hall, in the wedding, and in the mirror. A mirror that didn't reflect the truth, but reflected what you had to become, whether you liked it or not. Just like today, a sun-kissed face in the mirror might tell others you've just come back from vacation, even if all you did was work the fields. But in the Middle Ages, it was proof you belonged to the class that had to work under the sun, which is why the ideal skin was so pale, it looked almost anemic. The paler you were, the higher your status. The more bluish you looked, the more respect you got. No one cared if you were healthy, so long as your skin never saw the sun and your hands had no calluses. Want to be pale? Easy. Don't go outside, don't eat too much, and make sure to close the door when you breathe. No one called it deprivation. They called it refinement. And if you fainted from hunger, that was actually a plus, so long as you collapsed gracefully. Why was skin like printer paper so celebrated? Because it proved you didn't have to do anything at all. You just had to exist, like a living ornament. Some noble women starved themselves until their chests lost all shape, and that was considered the perfect standard. They weren't trying to shine, they were trying to disappear. While peasants were sunburnt from the wind in the fields, nobles wore white powder so thick it clung to them like the dust on a mummy. But that beauty didn't come from nature. It came from restraint, from hunger, and from the belief that the fewer colors you had, the fewer judgments you'd face. The beautiful weren't the happy ones. They were the ones who looked ready to be laid out on an altar. You might not believe it, but there was a time when people smeared pigeon's blood just to get some color in their cheeks. Others drank watered-down vinegar, not only to whiten their skin, but also to dull the feeling of hunger. And when someone asked how they lived, the answer was often, live lightly so you don't weigh down your own face. It was a way of life where even a spark of joy could be seen as vulgar. If you enjoyed your meal too much, you could be considered improper. Because beauty had to be hungry and cold and absolutely silent. They didn't look at you as a person, but as a plaster statue, one that could glide slowly through a grand hall. And if a bit of mud ever touched the hem of your gown, my condolences. You just tarnished the refinement of your entire bloodline. A single sunburn, no matter how small, could cost you a marriage that had been arranged for years. A marriage where beauty determined your value as if you were an item in a silent auction. From childhood, girls were taught to guard their skin tone as if it were their life. No sun, no loud laughter, no stretching your arms, because all of that might flush your cheeks. And that was crude. They didn't want you to shine. They wanted you to fade, to blur, to dissolve like a whiff of perfume. That wasn't even real. In the diary of a young woman from that era, there's a line. Today, my mother punished me for having eyes that were too alive. Today, you can stand before a mirror and adjust the lighting. Back then, light was the enemy because it revealed that you still had life in you. You didn't need heavy makeup. You only needed to vanish from the colors of the living world. And when someone praised you for being white as porcelain, they didn't realize porcelain is fragile and mostly kept locked away behind glass. Back then, beauty wasn't meant to be lived in, it was meant to be looked at in silence. You couldn't get dirty. You couldn't breathe too heavily. You couldn't even have the basic needs of a human being. If you feel suffocated just hearing this, congratulations, you're still normal. But if you think, well, that doesn't sound so bad, try fasting for 5 days and then attending a party in a waist-crushing gown. Or, easier still, go a week without smiling and then tell me you still feel natural. And that was only the beginning of beautiful skin in the Middle Ages. The bad news? It gets worse. If you thought the skin was torture, try putting yourself in the waistline of a 14th century lady. And I don't mean figuratively. I mean literally, inside a corset of rough cloth or stiff leather, laced until you could no longer hear your own stomach growl. Medieval beauty had no body positivity. It had the smaller, the better, and the harder to breathe, the higher the value. The ideal waist, not 56 centimeters. It was whatever number kept you from bending over to tie your own shoes. Some women even had to brace their hands on their hips just to sit down, because if they bent too far forward, their ribs might break. But you still had to smile, of course. A strained smile between two stomach spasms from lack of oxygen. And if you carelessly took one extra spoonful of porridge, sorry, you'd be paying for it with a night spent sleeping upright. A swollen belly under a corset was never called full. It was a flaw, a design error, a sign you were losing control of yourself. The irony was that corsets weren't made to protect. They were made to prove you didn't need to move. A woman who walked slowly, breathed shallowly, spoke softly, and never bowed her head, that was the beauty ideal. Not because she was refined, but because she no longer had enough air to do anything else. Today, people call that figure delicate or fragile. Back then, it was a prerequisite, proof you belonged to a class that didn't have to work. And if you had muscle, sorry, you were a laborer. Beauty was never allowed to be strong. A waist too honest would betray you, showing you had been hauling water, stoking fires, and sweeping courtyards. That's why beauty had to be hidden beneath layers of thick, tight fabric, never loosened in front of anyone. Some young women learned to eat so slowly that breakfast could last an entire hour, not out of elegance, but because eating too quickly might make them faint. And no one was surprised if you collapsed at a party, as long as you did it gently and in a beautiful pose. The more you squeezed your waist, the more people believed you had discipline. The more you held your breath, the more they thought you were virtuous. No one asked how you felt. They only checked whether the laces were tight enough. And if they loosened just a little, the looks would change. No longer admiration, but suspicion. You weren't judged by the sound of your voice, but by the faint creak of your corset when you tried to turn. Some ladies were so skilled they could faint onto a stone floor without wrinkling their dress. They were taught that as a life skill, and they called it virtue. Today, if someone tightened your waist so much you couldn't laugh, you'd call it abuse. Back then, it was a wedding gift, a corset, beautiful and suffocating, like a gilded trap you climbed into every morning. And if you asked, what did they endure it for? The answer was simple. They endured it to be considered valuable. A small waist could buy you a good marriage, a kinder gaze, or even a proper meal. They didn't live to love themselves. They lived to be chosen. And to be chosen, you had to look as though you had no internal organs. You didn't need strength. You only needed curves and silence. Maybe that's why so few women back then lived long, because they were never allowed to breathe for long enough. But their legacy lives on. In wedding photos, in tight bridal gowns, in toxic compliments. Oh, such a tiny waist, just like the old days, they say, not knowing that in the old days, the air smelled of disinfectant and perfume masking the scent of bruised flesh. So, are you sure you still want to be beautiful like the Middle Ages? Or are you just tightening yourself into a dream borrowed from someone else? Because in those days, beauty often began with hair, and beautiful hair was not just a sign of appearance, but a symbol of purity in the strangest way possible. Long, shiny, smooth hair meant you had virtue, even if you were secretly running a fever from scalp fungus. The problem was, no shampoo, no clean water, and no place to sit and comb your hair without picking up ash from the hearth. So how did they get beautiful hair? They used animal fat, egg whites, and cooled ash as a natural mask. Then they'd sit in front of a mirror or a piece of dull bronze and pray their hair wouldn't smell on a big holiday. Nice-smelling hair was hair sprayed with dry perfume. And dry perfume was the polite term for sulfur powder mixed with herbs. Tangled hair was combed with a broken wooden comb. If it couldn't be dead-angled, it was cut off, hidden, then cried over. Because if anyone saw you with short hair, you'd be seen as rebellious. Or worse, as a prostitute. A respectable woman had to keep her hair long, even if it was crawling with lice eggs. And it couldn't be shown in public, because hair was erotic. Seeing another woman's hair was considered a kind of moral fall. That's why they wore veils, hoods, and head coverings not for the weather, but for morality. If you ever saw a lady of that time scratching her head in the street, remember, that wasn't rudeness, it was survival. One stray louse could cause a fever lasting 3 days, and one damaged lock of hair could cost you a marriage. Some mothers even taught their daughters to rub flax oil mixed with salt into the scalp, because beauty must suffer, and suffer they did. Because if you mixed it wrong, you'd get a mild burn all around your forehead, and that mark would stay for years, while the beauty standard remained unchanged. Hair must be shiny, thick, and obedient. No split ends, no frizz, no straw-like texture, even if you slept on straw every night. Today, you might call hair a natural crown. Back then, hair was proof you still deserved respect. If your hair was thin, people thought you were sick. If it was curly, they thought you were wild. And if you were bald, my condolences, you'd better marry quickly before anyone found out. Without hair dryers, they dried their hair in the wind. If it rained, you kept it wet all day. And if you caught a cold from that, no problem, as long as your hair was dry in time for Sunday Mass. Some people would even boil herbs, steam their heads, then wrap themselves up like dumplings. Also, their hair could develop a noble aroma. That aroma was a blend of vetiver grass, apple cider vinegar, and a hint of leftover sulfur from the last anti-lice treatment. But as long as no one pinched their nose while passing by, you were fine. A true lady was someone whose hair could blow in the wind without anyone thinking it was a chemical accident. And if you were a servant, please avoid the wind. Your hair might blow, but no one would think it beautiful. Beauty was tied to class. So was hair. The same lice infestation. But if you were a noble, people called it unavoidable. If you were poor, they called you filthy, even if both of you bathed in the same public bathhouse. Injustice lived in every strand of hair, and the harder you tried to perfect it, the more you had to face the truth. No one actually had perfect hair, unless you painted it on a wall with expensive pigments. and called it a portrait of the beauty of the age. An ideal head of hair may never have existed, but the torment over it was real and lasted for centuries. You want beautiful hair? Give up running around. And if necessary, give up your scalp too. Because beauty standards don't wait for you to be healthy. They only demand that you have enough patience to suffer in silence. Hair that had been tortured but was still called feminine. Perhaps because pain was an inseparable part of that definition. Today you go for a hair spa once a month. Back then they steamed themselves, not to repair damage, but to survive through a banquet where people would only remember your hair, not what you said. And no matter how smart, funny, or kind you were, if your hair was ruined, you'd still be left behind. Because beauty back then wasn't meant to be loved. It was meant to be looked at and silently judged. Today, a smile might earn you points in someone's eyes. But in the Middle Ages, a smile could get you removed from the marriage list. But no, the sad truth is, they didn't have to endure anything at all. The ideal man of the time didn't need muscles, didn't need charm, didn't even need to smell good. They only needed one thing, to look so idle that they could get fat without even trying. The bigger the belly, the rounder the face, the paler the skin, the stronger the proof you didn't belong in the rice fields. And if your hands had no calluses, you could give a little wave to the Duchess without being judged. If your skin was tanned, your back straight, and your teeth healthy, sorry, you looked like a mercenary, not a nobleman. They didn't like muscular men. They liked men like dough soft, unresisting, and smelling faintly of power. The ideal model. Sitting all day without getting tired, eating all day without your rope strings getting in the way. Beer belly without the beer, extra flesh without the sweat. That was the pinnacle. If a woman had to squeeze herself into a corset to look slim, a man could throw on a wide robe to hide every contour. Not for modesty, but so they could avoid exercise while still being called composed. They didn't have to tighten anything. Just walk slowly, speak softly, and eat in the style of, "I'm not hungry, but I eat because I can." A 3-hour meal, grease on the lips, wine in the beard, and everyone called it manly. While a woman taking one bite of cake was judged, a man could devour the whole table and be praised as a connoisseur. No one told them to cover their armpits. No one required them to cinch their waist. No one was shocked if they snored at a banquet. In fact, the more carefree they were, the higher their status seemed, because only the powerful could afford not to care what others thought. They didn't have to maintain an image. They were the image. A plump gentleman, oily face, garlic breath, could still marry a beautiful wife, as long as he owned land. And don't forget, the double standard was such that his wife had to smell good to mask his smell. Some families were rich enough to hire people to fan them, not for cooling, but to blow away the husband's odor. And women had to pretend they didn't notice, while men pretended they never smelled at all. A man's scent wasn't criticized. It was called natural. A woman's scent? Lack of self-control. Men weren't taught how to live clean. They were taught how to live without asking permission. That girl tightened her corset until her chest turned purple to get married. That man? He just had to open his purse at the right moment. Love doesn't need appearances, they said. But really, they only said that when they were the man. In paintings, gentlemen often wore big hats, loose robes, and sat with legs wide open, not for comfort, but because they didn't have to sit closed. Their ease was privilege. A round belly could open diplomatic doors. A double chin could be painted as a face full of benevolence. And a lifetime of laziness could be called a contemplative demeanor if your rings were big enough. So why did women have to flatten their stomachs, shave their feet, rouge their cheeks, brush their teeth with charcoal, and wear shoes barely big enough to stand in, but not walk? Because that society didn't need handsome men, it needed wealthy men. And women had to be beautiful enough to get noticed by them. No one demanded that male icons of the time have abs. But women had to have porcelain skin, velvet hair, and a silk-soft heart. There were girls of 16 married off to men of 60 simply because he speaks so eloquently. No one asked, "Do "Do you love each other?" They only asked, "How many plots of land do you own?" And when a wife fainted from her corset, the husband would call the servant, instead of loosening the laces. That was medieval love. One sat doing nothing, the other sat perfectly still. One expanded his body, the other shrank hers until she almost disappeared. And they said, love back then was purer, maybe because no one had enough breath left to argue. And you? Where do you think true love begins? With a look? Or with the name on the land deed? However it began, it usually ended the same. Both lying in the same dark, damp room, being bitten by the same fleas, the only truly equal thing in the Middle Ages. But teeth were only a small corner of the picture. Every part of the body had its own standard, and everyone came with a price. Foreheads had to be high enough to warrant plucking out every strand of fringe. Skin had to be so pale it looked like paper, even if it meant lead poisoning. Feet had to be small enough to keep you from walking fast, because a lady, they said, should never be in a hurry. The body had to be soft and fragile, which meant weak, dependent, and always in need of someone to protect or control. Today, you can choose your hairstyle, your skin tone, your body shape. Back then, choice existed only in the mouths of those more powerful than you. And you existed only to be looked at and to be judged. And the scariest part? Many of those standards never really died. They just transformed into a modern version, softer, shinier, but built on the same principle. To be accepted, you must bend yourself to fit the mold someone else made for you. Beauty back then didn't come from a smile. It came from the ability to control your face like a wax mask. And when you lost your first tooth, no one said, "It's okay. It happens to everyone." They looked at you as if you had just slipped down the social ladder, because you no longer met the standard of being beautiful even in silence. No one fixed a smile. They simply learned to turn their head to the side when speaking to hide the worst parts. Some women had to paint their lips in deep red, not to stand out, but to hide the cracks at the corners caused by malnutrition. And sometimes, when you saw someone speak so little, it wasn't shyness. It was simply too painful to open their mouth. A lady had to smile with her eyes. Smiling with her mouth was far too dangerous. Perhaps you've heard the phrase, "A smile is the most powerful weapon." In the Middle Ages, it was proof you didn't know how to keep your mouth shut. And you know the most ironic part? Those with bad teeth were often the ones who truly ate, worked, and lived. But in that society, truth was never praised. They didn't care if you were kind. They only cared that you didn't reveal teeth that had rotted over the years. Beauty, once again, wasn't found in life, but in the ability to hide decay. And that's why, even today, you might brush your teeth 3 times a day and still feel too insecure to laugh out loud. Because that fear, perhaps, has been inherited from ancestors who learned to stay silent in order to survive. A genuine smile can light up a room, but in the Middle Ages, it could snuff you out before you even stepped inside. If you think today's beauty standards are heavy, remember, at least you can still go to the dentist. Back then, one smile could end you, because to have that bright white smile, people used a cosmetic that made you more beautiful each day, while killing you bit by bit. Would you use it? Medieval women didn't have to ask themselves that question. They already used it, and they called it white powder. Main ingredient, lead, a heavy, toxic metal, extremely effective at making you pale as a freshly unearthed mummy. Skin white as porcelain, flawless, that was the ideal. As for the peeling skin and broken blood vessels under the powder, no one said a word. It starts with a mild headache. Then comes the fatigue, the sleepless nights, the hair falling out. After that, confusion, necrosis, and sometimes the heart simply stops. But as long as your makeup doesn't smudge when you faint, you're still considered beautiful. No one warns you, no one asks questions. Because if every woman suffers the same pain, then that pain becomes the standard. Some women powder their faces 3 times a day, each layer thicker than the last, until their skin is no longer skin, but a chemical mask. Lips painted with mercury for a natural flush. Eyes lined with soot mixed with tree resin, burning and cracking the cornea. If your skin turns red, just add more powder. If the powder stops sticking, smear egg whites over your face, like mortar on a wall. And then one day your skin changes color. Not from the powder, but from internal bleeding. Still, you keep wearing the makeup, because natural ugliness is not forgiven. They don't love you, they love the illusion you build with poison. If you can't breathe, cut the dose. If you vomit, take a day off. Then start again. Because that face is the only reason anyone listens to you. Ladies would sit perfectly still for hours just to keep the foundation from cracking, because a single fissure could ruin an entire marriage negotiation. Some women died of liver failure at 28. The doctors found no cause, but her mirror shone bright. They would say, "She's so beautiful, she doesn't even look human." They didn't know that was entirely true, because she was no longer human. Her skin didn't breathe, her pulse stuttered, her organs were dissolving inside her. And when she smiles in the oil painting, that is her most beautiful moment, because she's no longer alive to suffer. Makeup wasn't to hide imperfections. It was to erase the self. It was a silent war between the real face and the shadow society wanted you to become. Each day, you surrendered another piece of your body in exchange for a pleasing glance from someone else. And the cruel truth was, the weaker you became, the more they praised you for being gentle. A beautiful woman never complained, even when her insides screamed from the toxins building up. Some records note that noble women often sat near windows, not to catch a breeze, but to let the lead powder fade from purple back to pale. There were balls where 3 young ladies would collapse at once, and everyone kept dancing, assuming they were simply overcome with emotion. In reality, they no longer had enough oxygen to stand more than an hour in heavy gowns and lead masks. One young woman was buried at just 24. People said she was beautiful until her last breath. No one said she died because she wanted to be called pretty. The living kept powdering. The dead were painted white. Who could tell what was real? Back then, beauty was not life. It was the art of imitating death exquisitely. And if you think makeup today makes you tired, remember, at least you're not using chemicals straight from a mine. You still have a choice. You can wipe it off and breathe. In those days, they had no choice. To remove the paint was to erase your very existence in the eyes of others. Every morning, they didn't paint their faces because they liked it. They did it because they feared being forgotten. Because a bare face back then was not enough to be heard. People didn't remember your voice. They remembered the shade of your lips at the last banquet. And if you had nothing striking, they would paint it on you, even if the price was your final breath. You could call it a sacrifice for beauty, but in truth, it was a controlled burial. And sadly, it still continues, only now with prettier packaging and sweeter advertising. Among the strangest beauty standards humans have ever created, perhaps none surpassed: the forehead. In the Middle Ages, the higher the forehead, the greater the sign of intellect and refinement. Not the high forehead means smart, your grandmother might say, but shaving your hairline clean and plucking more just to be sure. Sometimes plucking all the way to the crown of the head, so that in profile you couldn't tell if the woman was a noble or had just joined a convent. It didn't stop there, they shaved the eyebrows too, because hair was considered too animal to keep on an aristocratic face. Some records even state, thick eyebrows are the mark of a shallow woman. They said it with complete seriousness. So women plucked until their skin was raw, eyes swollen, then painted back 2 thin arcs like the tremble of a pencil line. If you've ever been annoyed at uneven brows, try drawing them when your hands are shaking from anemia and the candlelight flickers. And if you ask, why not just keep the brows? The answer is simple, because that wasn't beautiful. Beauty had to be elaborate, painful, demanding. It had to keep you sitting for hours before a mirror, just to turn yourself into a less hairy version. That was the top half. As for the bottom, the standard demanded you be perfectly flat-chested. Not because that era liked strange aesthetics, but because large breasts were seen as vulgar, animalistic, and impossible to hide under a corset. They didn't call it beauty. They called it indecency of the body. Slender girls with narrow shoulders, arched backs, and flat chests were considered the perfect ideal. And if you blossomed naturally, congratulations, you just lost about a quarter of your marriage prospects. Some noble women even bound their chests from puberty to avoid growing beyond the allowed limit. Skin marks were nothing. Shortness of breath was tolerable, as long as you kept that pure silhouette. A beautiful woman must be fragile. That's what they said when you fainted from lack of oxygen. And they still applauded because your dress stayed in place. In a society where less was equated with nobility, you had to learn to shrink yourself, both literally and figuratively. Less hair, less flesh, less voice, but always more standards. In truth, every natural feature was treated with suspicion, as if having a living body was a flaw to be corrected. The ideal woman didn't need to be strong or even real, only to look, from a distance, like freshly polished stone. And in stone, of course, there are no muscles, no breasts, no hair, no expressions. They didn't beautify to celebrate a real face. They edited to erase it entirely. Many portraits from that era looked so alike you couldn't tell who was who, because they all shared the same national beauty template. That template didn't allow gummy smiles, no freckles, no tucking your hair behind your ear unless a veil covered it first. You weren't allowed to be yourself. You had to be someone pre-programmed. So if you've ever thought a medieval lady looked noble, remember, she might have been nursing a headache, chest pains, and mild hunger. But as long as no one noticed, she was beautiful. And that was all that mattered. Now tell me, do you feel lucky to have eyebrows, to breathe freely, and to sit without squeezing your chest? Or is there still a part of you that wants to be perfect, even if the price is erasing the most human part of yourself? If you feel uneasy hearing this, good. At least you can still feel. And if you still think, then was prettier than now, let me ask you, are you ready to pluck all your hairline and bind your chest through the winter? Would you accept rejection just because your eyebrows grow the wrong way? Would you stand still for 4 hours just to have your face painted like a blinking mummy? Because that beauty wasn't allowed to live. It was only allowed to be looked at and remembered in paintings, where you could look like a true lady if no one looked too closely. And if you wonder why they all looked so eerily alike, maybe it's because they were all trying not to be themselves. The real question is, are you doing the same, with a different standard, a different era, but the same fear? Or are you ready to live with a real face, with hair, with breasts, with eyebrows, and with freedom? If you've ever complained about high heels hurting your feet, try imagining wearing shoes made of metal all winter. Noble shoes back then weren't made for walking. They were made to prove you didn't have to walk anywhere at all. Rigid soles, pointed toes, laces cutting deep into the skin. Each step like a silent contract that you will not run away. Wealthy women didn't walk slowly because it was graceful. They walked slowly because every step drew blood. If you saw a lady standing motionless in a corner, don't assume she was posing. She might simply be unable to turn. Beneath the gown was the corset, and beneath the corset was a body compressed like a tightly wrapped parcel. Tight enough to still breathe, barely. A corset cinched from the waist to the bust. Not to preserve a figure, but to create one. A figure that had never existed in nature. Had a big meal? Sorry, you weren't allowed to. The stomach had no space left. Need to pick up a dropped handkerchief? Impossible. Bending over meant risking a dislocated spine. The spine was no longer bone. It was a required curve, bent to the whim of a tailor you had never met. Some days you wanted to take a deep breath, but the corset allowed only existence, breathless and smiling. Then came the lace-up corset, the advanced level of self-distortion to fit a standard. The tighter the laces, the more arched the back, the smaller the waist, and the more scrambled the internal organs. Some women fainted mid-meal from poor circulation. Others didn't wake up at all. Few complained because before you died, you had already made a good impression. People praised petite as a pocket watch, but no one asked, inside that watch, were the gears breaking? You had to glide as you walked. In truth, you were just trying not to fall. Every time you sat down, you counted how many ribs were still intact. They dressed better back then, people say. Yes, if better means being unable to climb stairs. Noble women were never allowed to hurry, because if they ran, everything on them would break. literally and figuratively. Skirts so wide you needed attendants to hold them. Shoes so stiff you had to relearn how to walk. Corsets robbed you of sleep, and braids were woven so tightly that even sleep hurt. But as long as you looked good, who cared? Elegance in those days was silent endurance, the ability to stand for 4 hours without touching your stomach. This wasn't aesthetic taste. It was a control system through fabric, rope, and a mirror too small to show your whole self. You were forced to choose between comfort and existing in other people's eyes. Clothes weren't designed for you to move. They were designed for you to become smiling furniture. Your body was no longer yours. It belonged to the gaze. And that gaze did not accept folds, wrinkles, or irregular breaths. If you breathed too hard, you lacked refinement. If you leaned while sitting, you lacked discipline. If you sweated, you lacked class. They didn't care how you felt, only that you didn't disturb the bow at your waist. And if you wanted to rebel, you were an uncultured woman who didn't know beauty. Some girls got so used to pain, they stopped feeling it. They called it maturity. Some mothers taught their daughters to lace themselves tighter each morning, so they would understand self-worth. And some nights, a girl cried alone because her chest could no longer open the way it used to. But the next morning, she still donned the wig, slid her feet into iron shoes, and smiled with proper upbringing. It was beauty that warped the body, and then warped the emotions. Beauty was no longer freedom of expression. It was the ability to endure without anyone noticing. And if you still think people dressed better back then, let me ask, could you live a month without being able to bend down? Could you walk like a wooden statue just to be called graceful? Or would you choose to breathe, to eat, to walk quickly when you're late? Would you choose true beauty, or the kind that demands you lace yourself into deformity just to fit? In the Middle Ages, beauty standards were so strict that women were absolutely forbidden to sweat. Not because they weren't hot, of course they were, but because body odor was considered indecent. It didn't matter if you just hauled water, carried hay, or were wearing 6 layers of dress under the summer sun. You still had to smell lovely, but you weren't allowed to bathe often. Bathing too much was believed to be dangerous for both your health and your morals. Water, they thought, was a hiding place for evil spirits. And soap, that was for the sick or for prostitutes. So, how did they keep the scent? They sprinkled dried flowers into their skirts, hung little sachets of herbs inside their corsets, and prayed the wind blew in the right direction. If the smell still escaped, they blamed it on the kitchen fire, the chicken coop, the servants, anything but their own bodies. They wouldn't dare lift their arms above shoulder height, for fear that a slight rustle of fabric might release the forbidden scent. Can you imagine? Every step had to be taken lightly, not for grace, but so as not to stir up the real smell. And if you were caught having an odor, no one would tell you directly. They'd simply refuse to shake your hand. Fragrance became a kind of religion. A respectable woman was one who always carried the scent of flowers, even if she lived next to a pigsty. They used essential oils, but only dabbed them on the wrists, never directly on the skin, lest they be seen as too wanton. Some women even placed dried petals between their fingers, so that every movement felt like living in a garden. But in truth, they were living in a state of slow decay. Every day was a battle of fragrance against biology. They sat by windows not to enjoy the view, but to release some of the heat trapped beneath their gowns in the summer sun. The thicker the dress, the more sweat it trapped. But the more it trapped, the calmer your face had to be, as if you didn't even have sweat glands. The itching, the rashes, the blisters, all hidden behind an educated smile. Men could breathe heavily, spit, wipe their foreheads. Women, they used silk handkerchiefs, dabbed lightly, and hid away the cloth soaked through with sweat. On windless summer nights, women lay still, not to sleep, but to avoid producing scent in their dreams. And if you think this is an exaggeration, remember, some women were removed from their own weddings for a strong odor when passing the altar. That society wanted you to smell good, but never to ask how to smell good. You had to manage it yourself. Smell yourself. Judge yourself. Punish yourself if you weren't spring meadow enough. If you dared to say the truth, that real humans have real smells, congratulations, you just became the joke of the tea party. People didn't need you to be perfect. They just needed you not to be unpleasant. And the human body, more often than not, is unpleasant. That's why they mixed lavender with urine to mask odors, because if it wasn't pleasant, at least it was unusual. Some ancestral recipes used vinegar with wine or ash with ginger, sounding like magic, but born from desperation. And every time someone wrinkled their nose, you'd wonder, is it me? That panic drove you to sprinkle more, rub more, wrap more until your body could barely breathe, yet still wasn't fragrant enough. Today, you have deodorant, hot showers, and breathable fabrics. Back then, you had thick cloth, stifling rooms, and the expectation that you must always be like a freshly plucked flower. A flower that never wilts, never blooms, never sheds petals, just stands still for others to smell through glass. The scent had to be faint, sweet, and come from somewhere indeterminate, so long as it wasn't your own skin. Because your body was unspeakable, and its scent unseeable. So tell me, have you ever felt suffocated by not being allowed to just be yourself? Or do you still believe a woman must smell sweet, without ever asking, sweet according to whose standard? Perhaps, in a world where everyone masks their true scent, the first person who dares to breathe freely is the true rebel. So what about you? Would you walk into a room without spraying perfume first? Or are you also quietly panicking, just in case someone finds out that you smell? So welcome. You've just uncovered another thin layer in the legacy of the Middle Ages. And it's not written in history books. It's hiding beneath the fabric you wear every day. After hearing about medieval beauty standards for women, you might be hoping that at least men had to suffer just as much. But no, the sad truth is, they didn't have to endure anything at all. The ideal man of the time didn't need muscles, didn't need charm, didn't even need to smell good. They only needed one thing: to look so idle that they could get fat without even trying. The bigger the belly, the rounder the face, the paler the skin, the stronger the proof you didn't belong in the rice fields. And if your hands had no calluses, you could give a little wave to the Duchess without being judged. If your skin was tanned, your back straight, and your teeth healthy, sorry, you looked like a mercenary, not a nobleman. They didn't like muscular men. They liked men like dough, soft, unresisting, and smelling faintly of power. The ideal model. Sitting all day without getting tired, eating all day without your rope strings getting in the way, beer belly without the beer, extra flesh without the sweat. That was the pinnacle. If a woman had to squeeze herself into a corset to look slim, a man could throw on a wide robe to hide every contour. Not for modesty, but so they could avoid exercise while still being called composed. They didn't have to tighten anything, just walk slowly, speak softly, and eat in the style of, I'm not hungry, but I eat because I can. A 3-hour meal, grease on the lips, wine in the beard, and everyone called it manly. While a woman taking one bite of cake was judged, a man could devour the whole table and be praised as a connoisseur. No one told them to cover their armpits. No one required them to cinch their waist. No one was shocked if they snored at a banquet. In fact, the more carefree they were, the higher their status seemed, because only the powerful could afford not to care what others thought. They didn't have to maintain an image. They were the image. A plump gentleman, oily face, garlic breath, could still marry a beautiful wife, as long as he owned land. And don't forget, the double standard was such that his wife had to smell good to mask his smell. Some families were rich enough to hire people to fan them, not for cooling, but to blow away the husband's odor. And women had to pretend they didn't notice, while men pretended they never smelled at all. A man's scent wasn't criticized. It was called natural. A woman's scent? Lack of self-control. Men weren't taught how to live clean. They were taught how to live without asking permission. That girl tightened her corset until her chest turned purple to get married. That man? He just had to open his purse at the right moment. Love doesn't need appearances, they said, but really they only said that when they were the man. In paintings, gentlemen often wore big hats, loose robes, and sat with legs wide open, not for comfort, but because they didn't have to sit closed. Their ease was privilege. A round belly could open diplomatic doors. A double chin could be painted as a face full of benevolence. And a lifetime of laziness could be called a contemplative demeanor if your rings were big enough. So why did women have to flatten their stomachs, shave their feet, rouge their cheeks, brush their teeth with charcoal, and wear shoes barely big enough to stand in, but not walk? Because that society didn't need handsome men. It needed wealthy men. And women had to be beautiful enough to get noticed by them. No one demanded that male icons of the time have abs. But women had to have porcelain skin, velvet hair, and a silk-soft heart. There were girls of 16 married off to men of 60 simply because he speaks so eloquently. No one asked, "Do you love each other?" They only asked, "How many plots of land do you own?" And when a wife fainted from her corset, the husband would call the servant, instead of loosening the laces. That was medieval love. One sat doing nothing, the other sat perfectly still. One expanded his body, the other shrank hers until she almost disappeared. And they said, love back then was purer, maybe because no one had enough breath left to argue. And you? Where do you think true love begins? With a look? Or with the name on the land deed? However it began, it usually ended the same. Both lying in the same dark, damp room, being bitten by the same fleas, the only truly equal thing in the Middle Ages. It didn't matter if you were a peasant or a noble. If you had blood and skin, you had lice. Lice didn't care about wealth. They only needed a warm enough body to lay eggs. And your body, fragrant or not, was still a 5-star hotel for them. Head lice lived in your hair, body lice in your clothes, bed bugs under the straw mattress. Nobody lived alone. Some burned straw every night, not for warmth, but to smoke the bugs out before sleep. Yet they always came back as if invited, sometimes in greater numbers, sometimes bringing friends. People learned to accept it. No one flinched at the sight of eggs clinging to a sleeve. They just plucked them off, brushed them away, and carried on with the ceremony. There was even a popular pastime, picking lice off each other, a sort of intimate bonding for unmarried couples. And if you caught a big one, that was good luck. If it burst, well, sorry for the image. In the bedroom, you never slept alone. You slept with bedbugs, flea bites, and the constant buzzing in your ear. If you ever itched for no reason, trust me, there was a reason. You just couldn't see it. Clothes were hung in the sun not to smell nice, but to bore the bugs into leaving. But they didn't get bored. They were loyal. They followed you through harvest, through weddings, through funerals. Some women had maggots growing in wounds without knowing, until they moved. Some gentlemen died of fever, only to be found with a flea nest under the fur collar. One bite from a disease-carrying louse could keep you bedridden for 2 weeks, with your memory gone. But who cared? Everyone had them. If you complained, people looked at you as if you were pretentious. Back then, endurance to itching was seen as a measure of patience and morality. Scratch hard in public and you were vulgar. Scratch lightly and you were refined. Over time, people learned to scratch with their eyes, or to accept itching as part of their personality. Some records say, God tests man with vermin to see who is worthy of sainthood. But no saint ever died from bedbugs. Only commoners, many of them. You'd wake up covered in bites. Ask, is it the bed? No, it's because you're still alive. Some smeared beeswax around their neck. Not for beauty, but to stop lice from climbing to the face. And you thought you were alone? No, there was an entire ecosystem under your skirt. They ate, laid eggs, died, and multiplied to the rhythm of your heartbeat. The pain from bites was never the worst part. The worst was catching one. And it was still moving. There were no pesticides, only silence, and hope that you'd still be conscious in the morning. People shared blankets with bedbugs and scalps with lice. There were special wooden racks for airing clothes, so the bugs could crawl out before you wore them again. That wasn't pest control. That was life. That was routine. That was in every fold of fabric. So when you sit there feeling a little itchy, remember, you live in a luxurious age. Luxurious because you can see a dermatologist spray insect repellent and change pillowcases weekly. In the past, changing the pillowcase meant flipping it over, hoping the other side had fewer eggs. But either way, bugs didn't choose sides. They only needed blood. And you have blood. So next time a bug flies past your dinner table, don't scream. Greet it the way your great-great-grandmother once did. Not everyone has a best friend, but everyone once had lice. And if you ever feel lonely in the middle of the night, remember, you might not be entirely alone. After all the corsets, the lead powder, the bite marks, and the hunger, what's left isn't beauty. It's silence. A silence stretching from dawn to dusk, from chapel to bedchamber, from mirror to tombstone. Women of that time didn't live to be loved. They lived to avoid being judged. No dreams, no choices, only a reputation fragile as a dusting of powder on the face. Each day was a trial. How much could you endure before collapsing? But you weren't allowed to collapse. You had to stand tall, smile, and pretend it was all virtue. No one asked if you were tired because in a world where true feelings were considered improper, the question didn't exist. A proper lady never needed help, even if she was gasping for air under gowns heavy as armor. She didn't complain. She didn't rebel. She didn't take the last bite at the banquet. She knew how to disappear while still being present. She was a scented shadow, a body without needs, a smile without a voice. Sometimes in the dark, she cried, silently, unseen, for no reason she could name, except exhaustion. Exhaustion from not being allowed to be herself. But in the morning, she wiped her eyes, fixed her hair, and stepped into another day without hope. They said, women are the weaker sex, but the truth is they were strong enough to survive a system that crushed them to the bone. Men could be angry, women could not. Men could fail. Women could not forget to tighten their waist. They carried every expectation as if it were destiny, never allowed to set it down. And if they did fall, people would say, she wasn't strong enough to be the wife of a decent man. These women were not victims. They were survivors. Survivors in a world that believed beauty was your only reason to exist. Every blister, every crack, every bruise was proof that you had paid the price for your presence. You weren't praised for being intelligent. You were only accepted if you looked right. And if someone said, she's as beautiful as an angel, that angel was never allowed to eat too much. There were no fat angels, no angels with thick eyebrows, no angels who dared to ask, may I breathe for a moment? Endurance was the measure of your worth. Basic needs were seen as weakness. And the bitterest part? It was often other women who enforced these rules, because they had been taught the same lesson. If you don't comply, you will be left behind. So you learned to survive by not reacting, not feeling, not needing anything. You turned yourself into an object, easy to display, easy to control, easy to forget. And one day, no one asked how you felt, because they assumed you never had. Beauty then was not a reward. It was a punishment for those without the privilege of living honestly. A poet once wrote, she was as beautiful as a marble statue, and that was meant as praise. No one asked, does she wish to move? Perhaps you think, it's different now. But look at how you still scold yourself for a small belly after dinner. How you apologize for going out without makeup. How you hold your breath in photos. Has the Middle Ages truly ended? Or have we simply traded corsets for face filter apps and compliments for little red heart icons? Are you truly free? Or have you just swapped one mold for another, softer, but still just as tight? And if tomorrow you stopped trying to be beautiful, who would still listen to you? Who would think you deserve to be here? That's the question no one teaches you to answer. Only to stay silent when someone stares too long. But you are still here, still breathing, still alive, still reading these words, which means you haven't given up on yourself. And maybe that is the most beautiful act of resistance a woman has ever created. Evening falls. The sun tilts, as if tired of witnessing it all. You sit at the edge of the bed, where the bedbug bites have not yet healed, and the smell of sweat mixed with stove ash lingers faintly beneath the fabric. No one asks what you've been through, because you're still fully dressed and still breathing. You remove each layer of dress, slowly, as if peeling away each fragment of a role others forced upon you. Red marks from the corset cut into your waist. A dull ache runs through your back. Your neck stiff as stone. Your hands numb from a day spent never relaxing. On that face, powder still clings, though it means nothing now. Though no one is looking anymore. You raise a hand to your hair. It's dry, brittle, smelling of old vinegar. But you smooth it down anyway because you no longer know what else to do. A groan from somewhere, another woman removing her corset. Also thinking, is this living? The room is silent. Only the faint thump of a heart remains, as if it too is tired of beating for so long inside a cage. You lie down. The pillow is not soft, the mattress not flat, but at least you no longer have to smile. No need to keep up appearances. No need to press your thighs together. No need to hold your breath. Only breathing, even if it sounds like wind hissing through an old door crack. Another day ends, and you have survived. Somehow, for whatever reason, even if no one calls your name in their prayers. You pull the straw blanket to your chest. Close your eyes. In your mind, only one sentence remains. Tomorrow will be the same. Perhaps you'll dream if you have the strength. Perhaps you'll just drift off out of habit, not choice. Outside, the bedbugs begin to crawl. Lice slip past your collar. Your stomach growls like an old unwashed pot. But you're not afraid. Fear was worn away the first time you were told that ugliness is a sin. No more dreams. No more resistance. Only existence. Steady as the ticking of a clock without a face. And if someone were to ask, what does beauty bring? You would not answer right away. You would only remain silent, because you know. The price of that silence has been paid with tonight's sleep. Some people still say, I wish I could live in the Middle Ages. They usually say that while sitting on a sofa, eating pizza, watching medieval dramas on a 4K screen. They love the long gowns, the wine feasts, the stone castles, things no one in the year 1325 was actually clean enough to enjoy. They imagine themselves as princesses, as knights, as people outside of time, never as someone scratching fleas all night. But the Middle Ages didn't cast roles. It threw you where it wanted and you stayed there. No one asked your opinion. And most likely you wouldn't live in a castle. You'd live under the kitchen stairs, by the hearth, with the rats. You wouldn't have lace dresses. You'd have 3 layers of heavy, musty cloth, damp in the spring. You wouldn't spend afternoons reading books. You'd be picking bugs out of your feverish child's hair after bathing them in freezing well water. You wouldn't get to choose your hairstyle. You'd pluck your eyebrows, pluck your hairline, starve yourself, and never complain, because surviving was already a privilege, and surviving beautifully was rarer than a breeze that actually smelled good. So, do you still want to go back to 1325? Not as someone watching it on a screen, but as someone real, hungry, itchy. If the answer is no, good. It means you're still sane. If the answer is yes, then welcome. You'll be given a bundle of straw, a corset, and 3 starter fleas. But if you're here in the year 2025, still feeling the pressure to be beautiful, to be pale, to be silent, then maybe you never really left the Middle Ages at all. The only difference is that now, the thing squeezing your waist might be a face filter app. The heavy dress is society's expectations. And the lessons in silence come from the sound of likes, not the voice of a priest. But you do have one thing they didn't, a choice. So if you think this video is worth remembering, like it, or don't. It's up to you. And if you just exhaled a little, knowing you don't have to live in 1325, then welcome back.